He opened his eyes and saw a spot on the ceiling that looked like Australia. Then he realized there were two sets of memories in his head. One was his own. The other belonged to a young baron whose uncle had hanged himself 3 days ago, leaving behind ruins and a debt that couldn't be paid off even in 100 years. First comes the smell. Dampness, mold, something sour and old. That's what a basement smells like when it hasn't been aired out in 10 years. Ethan blinks. The spot isn't going anywhere. The canopy over the bed hangs by a thread, its rotten tatters drooping down. He sits up and nearly falls over. His body won't obey him. His hands feel like someone else's. His fingers are long and white. Two memories unfold in his mind at once. Ethan Clark, 27 years old, Pittsburgh, engineer. A bridge, a river, darkness, and another layer of darkness on top of it. Ethan Houghton, 18 years old, a baron. His parents died of a fever. His guardian uncle hanged himself 3 days ago. 60,000 gold pieces in debt. 3 villages on the brink of starvation. Winter in 4 months. He swings his legs onto the floor. The stone burns with cold. His body weighs 50 kilograms. He stands up and staggers. He grabs hold of the bedpost. The post creaks. He staggers to the window and peers out. The courtyard of Houghton Castle lies below like an open wound. The wall on the right has sagged. The gate hangs by a single hinge. The stable is empty. A man-sized pile of rubbish is rotting in the corner. Beyond the wall, the forest rises. Dark, dense, endless. Ethan presses his forehead against the glass and reads the ruins like a blueprint. The rotten beams are visible by the way they sag. The foundation has sunk 4 centimeters. It stinks because the cesspool is right under the castle instead of outside the perimeter. Who on earth built it this way? No magic. No army. No money. The body of a teenager who'd never lifted anything heavier than a book in his life. And right then, he smiles. Not wildly, calmly. The way a person smiles when they've spotted a challenge. Because in Ohio in 2017, things were worse. The same debts. The same ruin. The same people who didn't believe anything could ever be changed. He managed back then. He'll manage now, too. The door creaks behind him. He turns around. An old woman stands frozen in the doorway. A gray-haired bundle. Her apron is patched in 6 places. Her eyes are red. She looks at him the way people look at a corpse that has suddenly sat up in its coffin. It's Martha, the only maid left after Uncle's death. The rest fled, taking whatever they could carry. She brings a bowl of gray porridge, cold, unsalted, cardboard soaked in water. Ethan eats it all. His body needs calories, and being picky in his situation is foolish. Then he asks her 3 questions in a row. How many people are in the villages? Is there a blacksmith? Where are his uncle's receipts? Martha opens her mouth and closes it. For half a year, the young baron hadn't asked about anything except food and blankets. And now 3 questions, each to the point. She answers. 400 people across 3 villages. 1 blacksmith. Old Bran in Little Houghton. The receipts are in the chest in the study. He nods and goes into the study. He opens the chest. He reads. And 20 minutes later, he realizes the scale of the disaster. Her uncle had borrowed money from everyone. The West March moneylenders, the trading house, neighbor Baron Moldwyn, some people whose names are illegible. The total isn't 60,000, closer to 70. Interest is mounting. Part of the debt is secured by land. If he doesn't pay by spring, the creditors will take the villages. Ethan sorts the parchments into 3 stacks. The red one is due right now. The yellow one is manageable. The green one is usurious and can be contested. The red one is the thickest. The Baron's vision blurs after 10 minutes of reading. Yet another problem to add to the long list. He stands up and goes out into the courtyard. He walks around the perimeter of the castle. He counts his steps. He touches the stones. The north wall is still standing. The south wall has sagged. The east wall is gone entirely, replaced by a rotting palisade. He peeks into the kitchen. The hearth is smoking. The chimney is clogged. A plan immediately forms in his mind. Clean it out. Install an elbow. Add a damper. The draft will be twice as strong, and firewood consumption will be a third less. He goes into the pantry. 3 sacks of grain, a barrel of turnips, a bundle of dried fish, enough for 2 weeks if he scrapes by. Not enough for 400 people. He walks down the hill toward the village. His legs give out every 100 steps. His heart pounds from the light walk. The fields are overgrown. Half the grain is rotting, left unharvested. There's no livestock. The village is slowly dying. Patched up roofs, windows without shutters. Women and old people are in the street. There are almost no men. They recognize him but aren't happy to see him. An old man by the well freezes in place. 2 children hide behind a fence. The Baron hasn't been here in over a year, and no one was expecting him. Ethan walks and counts. Houses, wells, distances. He's looking for one thing: the blacksmith shop. He finds it on the edge of the village. Thin smoke drifts from the chimney. Standing by the forge is a broad, gray-haired man with arms like 2 ham hocks. Bran. He strikes with his hammer. Once, twice, 3 times. Sparks fly. Ethan isn't looking at the iron. He's looking at the bellows. Old ones. Single-chambered. Bran squeezes the lever and air surges out in jerks. The temperature fluctuates. The metal heats unevenly. The horseshoe comes out lopsided. Bran curses under his breath. He notices the Baron. No joy, no respect, just exhaustion. He mutters something and goes back to work. Ethan doesn't leave. He asks for a scrap of leather and some charcoal. He sits down on a log and draws. A double bellows with a counterweight. A valve at the inlet. When one closes, the other opens. The air flows continuously, not in pulses. The temperature will jump 200 degrees. Bran doesn't listen at first. Then he comes over. He frowns. He mutters that the kid is sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Ethan doesn't argue. He explains it again, step by step. One bellows is always blowing. The metal heats up evenly. The horseshoe will come out right the first time. Bran is silent. He looks at the drawing, at his bellows, back at the drawing. Then he takes off his apron and says that if the Baron is so smart, he should help with the assembly. They work until nightfall. Ethan cuts the leather. Bran bends the wood. Ethan nearly collapses from exhaustion twice. His hands are shaking. Bran gives him a strange sideways glance. The Baron who's sweating. The Baron who's getting dirty. The Baron who isn't complaining. It doesn't make sense to the old blacksmith. By nightfall, the prototype stands by the forge. Crooked, unattractive, functional. Bran squeezes the lever. The air flows steadily. The fire grows. It turns white. Bran thrusts the iron into the heat, and 10 minutes later strikes it with his hammer. The metal yields like butter. In the morning, he places a nail in front of Ethan. Thin, even, strong. Ethan tries to bend it. The nail won't budge. They've never made iron like this in Houghton. Bran slowly takes off his cap. This isn't a bow to the Baron. It's a sign of respect for a man who knows his craft. Ethan tucks the nail into his breast pocket. This nail will stay with him. As a first step. He steps out of the smithy at dawn. 400 men. 70,000 in debt. 3.5 months until winter. 1 nail in his pocket. It's not much. But yesterday he didn't even have a nail. Ethan returned to the castle with a nail in his pocket and a list in his head. The list was long. First, food. 3 sacks of grain and a barrel of turnips won't last 400 men even a week. Second, firewood. Winter comes early in these parts. The forest is nearby, but there's nothing to chop it with. The axes in the village are dull and nicked. Third, people. He needs to figure out who's left, who can do what, who's willing to work. He sat down at the table in his uncle's office and began to draw up what he had called a resource map back at the factory in Ohio. A piece of parchment, charcoal instead of a pencil. On the left, a column listing what we have. On the right, what we need. In the middle, what we can make from the first to get the second. The map turned out to be a bleak one. The assets of the Houghton barony looked like this. A castle in a state of disrepair. 1 smithy with new bellows. 1 blacksmith. 1 maid. A forest. A river. Clay along the banks. Limestone on the hills. 400 people, most of whom didn't believe that tomorrow would be better than yesterday. He looked at the list and thought. Then he put a period after the word river and underlined it twice. River. The barony had a river, a small one. Martha said it was called the Quiet River. The current was moderate. It didn't dry up even in August. A river is energy. Energy is a mill. A mill is flour. Flour is bread. Bread is life. He got up and headed back down the road, this time to another village, Middle Houghton. Larger than Little Houghton, 30 houses. Situated on the banks of the Quiet River, the village elder lived there, Roland Cartwright. A sturdy man in his 50s with a thick beard and the stern gaze of someone accustomed to being deceived. Ethan found him in the yard. The village headman was repairing a fence. He saw the Baron and stood up straight. His face bore the same expression as everyone else's, surprise and distrust. The young Baron hadn't left the castle in half a year, and here he was, arriving on foot, dirty and pale. Ethan didn't waste time on pleasantries. He said he wanted to build a mill, a new one, on the river, with a wheel turned by water from above, not from below. Roland looked at him as if he were a madman. There was a mill in the barony, an old one, hand-powered, 2 millstones and a donkey that walked in circles. The donkey had died last month. Since then, they'd been grinding grain by hand. The women took turns. Ethan explained, an overshot wheel. Water falls from above onto the blades. It turns the shaft. The shaft, via a gear mechanism, turns the millstone. No donkey or people are needed. The river does it all by itself, around the clock. The flour comes out finer, more of it, faster. Roland listened. His beard twitched. He said it sounded like a fairy tale. Ethan said he'd show him a blueprint. Roland said he didn't know how to read blueprints. Ethan said he'd demonstrate with his hands then. They went to the river. Ethan found a spot, a bend in the river with a drop of about 2 meters. Perfect. He began to explain. He drew a diagram in the sand with a stick. The dam goes here. The diversion channel goes here. The wheel goes here. The mill house goes here. Roland looked at the drawing and said nothing. Then he asked how much it would cost. Ethan replied that they had no money, but they had wood. They had stone. They had their hands. We need people. 20 men for 3 weeks. Roland asked why they should bother. They're hungry. No one's going to work for promises. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he said this. Whoever works at the mill gets the first milling for free, 1/10 of all the flour, every month, for as long as the mill stands. Roland fell silent for a long time. He was thinking his head. Ethan could see his lips moving. Then the village elder said he'd talk to the people. He wasn't promising anything. Ethan nodded and headed back. On the way, he turned into the woods. Not on purpose. His body was tired. His head was spinning. He wanted to sit in the shade. He found a fallen tree and sat down. He closed his eyes. Silence. Birds. The scent of pine needles and wet earth. Nice. Almost like Shenley Park on Sundays. He sat there for about 5 minutes. Then he heard a sound. Quiet, as if someone were tapping from inside the tree. He opened his eyes and looked. An oak tree stood nearby. Huge. Old. A trunk 3 arm spans wide. The bark was darkened and covered with moss. The sound was coming from the trunk. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, faint, as if someone were tapping with their fist on a door that had been locked 1,000 years ago. Ethan stood up and walked over. He pressed his palm against the bark. Warm. The tree was warm. Not from the sun, from the inside. He walked around the oak. On the back side of the trunk, there was a crack in the bark. Narrow, long, from the ground up to his chest. Light seeped from the crack. Pale, silvery, like moonlight, but in the daytime. Ethan bent down and peered into the crack. There was something inside. Small, curled up, glowing. It was breathing. He took a step back. A word came to the young Baron's mind. Fairies. Creatures from the age of fairies. No one spoke of them aloud. The Inquisition had burned everything associated with them. Textbooks were vague. They were. They're gone. Leave them alone. Ethan stood in front of the oak tree and thought. The engineer in him said he should leave. Not his problem. He had enough of his own. The man inside him said that someone was locked inside. For 1,000 years. And knocking. He reached out and touched the crack. The bark cracked beneath his fingers. More. More. The crack widened. The light grew brighter. Ethan braced himself with both hands and pulled the bark apart. His body was weak, but the bark was old and brittle. It broke like dry bread. Light poured out. Ethan squinted. When he opened his eyes, a creature was suspended in the air before him. Small, the size of a palm. Silver hair. Its skin was pale, almost transparent. Its eyes were the color of melted snow. The wings on its back were as thin as a dragonfly's. The creature looked at him. He looked at the creature. A second passed. 2. 3. The creature blinked. Then it opened its mouth and said something in a language Ethan didn't know. The voice was soft, like the ringing of thin glass. The young baron had no memory of this language. But Ethan understood. Not the words, the meaning. She was asking who he was. He answered aloud. Ethan, Baron Houghton. She asked why he had opened the door. He said she had been knocking. She fell silent. She hovered in the air and looked at him with eyes that held 1,000 years. Then she slowly settled into his palm. She weighed as little as a sparrow. Warm, trembling. She said her name, Leanne. He repeated it. Leanne. She nodded and began to cry. Silently. Her tears were silver, like light streaming through a crack. Ethan stood in the forest with a fairy in the palm of his hand, not knowing what to do. He hadn't known how to comfort anyone in his past life either, so he simply stood still. He waited. After a minute, she stopped crying. She wiped her face with hands the size of peas. She looked at him and asked a question that took his breath away. She asked how many years had passed. He didn't know exactly, but the Baron's memory recalled that the age of fairies had ended about 1,000 years ago. He told her that. Leanne froze. 1,000 years. She had spent 1,000 years in that oak tree. Everyone she knew was dead. The world she remembered no longer existed. She trembled again. But she didn't cry. Instead, she spread her wings and rose into the air. She looked at the forest, at the sky, at her hands, then at Ethan, and she asked a second question. What did he need? Ethan thought for a moment. The honest answer was long. He needed everything: food, warmth, tools, time, a miracle. But he kept it short. He needed help. He was building something, and he didn't have much time. Leanne asked what he was building. Ethan said one word. The future. Leanne looked at him for a long time. Then she said she knew how to do something. She doesn't cast fireballs. She doesn't fly faster than the wind. She doesn't kill enemies with a glance. But she knows how to make things better. Metal is denser. Wood is stronger. Yeast is livelier. Glass is clearer. She's a catalyst. She improves whatever she touches. Ethan listened, and lights began to flicker in his mind. One after another. Like the lights on a factory ceiling when the switch is flipped. If she can improve steel, then Brand's Forge becomes not just a forge, but a manufacturing facility. If she can improve wood, then the mill will last not 10 years, but 50. If she can improve yeast, then the bread will rise twice as high using the same grain. He asked what she wanted in return. Leanne flew close to him. She almost touched his nose. She looked him in the eyes. And she said she needed just one thing. For him not to lock her away again. For her to be by his side. Not a tool, not an object. By his side. Ethan held out his hand, his pinky. A childish gesture, but the only one that came to mind. Leanne looked at his pinky. She didn't understand. He explained that this was how they sealed promises. She wrapped both hands around his pinky. A contract. He promised she would be by his side. She promised she would help. They stood in the forest. A man from another world and a fairy who had slept for 1,000 years. Both had lost everything they knew. Both were starting from scratch. They walked back to the castle together. Leanne sat on his shoulder and turned her head in all directions. The world had changed. The trees were different. The road was different. Even the air smelled different. She asked questions non-stop. What kind of building was this? Why was the roof shaped that way? What kind of animal was in the pen? Ethan answered briefly. A castle. Because they built it as best they could. A goat. When they entered the courtyard, Martha saw the fairy and dropped the bucket. Ethan told her that this was Leanne, that she would be living with them, that it wasn't up for discussion. Martha picked up the bucket. Her hands were shaking, but she nodded. The old maid had outlived the deaths of 2 masters and the suicide of a 3rd. A fairy perched on the shoulder of a 4th was no longer the most terrifying thing to happen in this castle. That evening, Ethan sat in his study drawing a blueprint of a mill. Leanne hovered in the air nearby and watched. Sometimes she would poke her finger at the drawing and ask why that particular line was there. Ethan explained. A gear train, a gearbox, a slide bearing. Leanne listened and nodded. Then she said that if she touched the wood from which the gear would be made, the teeth wouldn't wear down for twice as long. Ethan looked at her, then at the drawing, then back at her. Twice as long. That changed everything. The gears were the weak link. In the Middle Ages, wooden teeth broke all the time. If Leanne could fix that, if she could do it consistently, then he wasn't just dealing with a fairy. He was holding the Industrial Revolution in his hands, 200 years ahead of schedule. He smiled. Leanne saw his smile and grew wary. She asked what he had in mind. Ethan said that in the morning they were going to the river at night to build a mill. Leanne said she'd never built a mill before. Ethan said neither had he, but he knew how, and that was half the battle. Construction of the mill began 3 days later. Roland kept his word. He brought not 20 but 14 men. 6 refused. They said they wouldn't slave away for the promises of a blissful little boy. Ethan wasn't offended. 14 was fine. He arrived at the banks of the Tchaya at dawn. Leanne was sitting on his shoulder, hiding under his collar. People weren't supposed to see her. Not yet, anyway. The Inquisition burned everything associated with fairies. One denunciation and it was off to the stake. Ethan began by laying out the plans. Using sticks and rope, he marked the outline of the dam. He showed where the canal would be, where the wheel's base would be, where the mill house would stand. Roland stood nearby, watching skeptically. So did the men. They saw before them a pale, boyish baron who weighed less than any of them, yet was giving orders. Ethan knew that look. He'd seen it at every factory he'd visited in his past life. A new consultant. Young, smart. Too smart. The workers won't believe it until they see results. He needed to show results quickly. He picked up an axe. His hands were weak, but he remembered the technique. The right grip. The angle of the swing. Using his body, not just his arms. He felled the first tree in 20 minutes. A bit crooked. Slow. But he cut it down. The men exchanged glances. Then they picked up their own axes. By noon, they had 12 logs. By evening, 25. Ethan worked alongside everyone else for the first 2 hours. Then his body gave out. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurring. He sat down on a rock and switched to supervising. He showed them where to place the logs, how to trim them, and at what angle to cut the notches. The men grumbled, but did as they were told. On the 3rd day, they began building the dam. Stones from the bank, clay for caulking, and logs laid across the riverbed. The work was hard and wet. Ethan stood knee-deep in the water, holding the logs in place while they were secured. By evening, he was too exhausted to speak. That night, Leanne sat next to him on the windowsill and said nothing. Then she said he was killing himself. Ethan said he was building a mill. Leanne said it was one and the same in his case. He laughed. Then he coughed. Leanne looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, something between anger and concern. On the 5th day, the first problem arose. One of the workers, a young guy named Ted, dropped a log on his foot. His foot wasn't broken, but it had swollen up. Ted sat on the shore cursing. The others stood around him looking gloomy. Roland approached Ethan and said that the men were tired, that the work was dangerous, and that his promise was all well and good, but you can't cure a leg with flour. Ethan nodded. He walked over to Ted. He examined the leg. It was badly bruised, but the bone was intact. He took off his shirt and tore it into strips. He wrapped Ted's leg tightly. An improvised bandage. Not the best, but it would do. Ted stared at him with his mouth agape. The Baron gave him his shirt. The Baron, kneeling before a commoner, was bandaging his leg. They'd never seen anything like this in Houghton. Ethan stood up. He told Ted to rest for 3 days. Then he turned to the others and said they'd continue tomorrow morning, that he was increasing the share. Not 1/10 of the flour, but 1/8. For everyone who works until the end. Roland looked at him with something new in his eyes. Not with trust. No, with interest. On the 10th day, Ethan brought Bran. The blacksmith arrived, dragging a sack of iron parts with him. Hinges, staples, axles. Ethan had been drawing blueprints for him every evening after working on the river. Bran forged during the day. The new bellows were doing their job. The iron came out smooth and strong. Bran made the axle for the water wheel in 2 days. Thick, straight, without a single crack. When he brought it and set it on the ground, the men gathered around and felt it. They'd never seen iron like this before. Ethan looked at their faces and knew it was working. It's not words that convince. It's things.
A result you can touch with your hands. That night, Leanne touched the axle.
Ethan stood nearby and watched. Her palms glowed. The silvery light seeped into the metal. The axle didn't look any different. But Ethan knew that now it would last not 5 years but 15, maybe 20. The molecular structure had become denser, fewer voids, fewer stress points. Leanne was exhausted afterward. She sat on his shoulder and nuzzled him. He asked if it was too much for her. She said that after 1,000 years of sleep, it was good for her to work. He asked if she was serious. She said she was serious. On the 14th day, they installed the wheel. That was the most difficult part. The wheel was 3 meters in diameter, wooden, with spokes, heavy. 12 men hoisted it with ropes. Ethan gave the orders. His voice gave out on the 3rd try. The wheel settled onto the axle on the 3rd try. When it fell into place and came to a standstill, everyone fell silent. Then Ethan said to open the sluice gate. Roland pulled the lever. Water gushed from the canal onto the blades from above. The wheel trembled, it creaked, and it started turning. Slowly, then faster, then smoothly, round after round. Water fell on the blades, and the wheel spun. Without a horse, without a donkey, without human hands. The men watched. Roland watched. Ted sat on the bank with his bandaged leg and watched. No one said a word. The wheel turned. The water roared. Ethan stood there watching too. His hands were shaking. Not from weakness, from something else. He'd seen this 100 times. In factories. In factories. That moment when the mechanism starts up for the first time and you realize it's working. That the calculations were correct. That the blueprint had become a reality. You never get used to that feeling. Never. All that remained was to finish the mill house and install the millstones. Another week, maybe 10 days. But the wheel was turning, and people could see it turning. The next morning, 6 more men came to Roland. The very same ones who'd refused at first. They said they wanted to work too. Roland looked at Ethan. Ethan said 1/8 of a measure of flour. The same for everyone. The 6 nodded. Alongside the mill, Ethan was busy with other matters. Every evening after working on the river, he would sit in his study and make plans. Debts. The most urgent IOU was due in 2 months. 3,000 gold pieces to Baron Moldwyn. If he didn't pay, Moldwyn had a claim to Little Houghton, the entire village. Ethan didn't have 3,000 gold pieces. He didn't even have 1,000. Or 100. He thought about it for 3 evenings. On the 4th, he came to a decision. Nails. Bran made the best nails in the county. With the new hammers, the quality had tripled. Everyone needs nails. Always. Builders, coopers, carpenters. The price of good nails in Westmarch is high because the local blacksmiths forged junk. If Bran made only nails and staples, nothing else, every day, from morning till night, then in a month he could forge enough to sell at the fair and make, if not 3,000, then at least 500. 500 would be enough to pay the interest and ask for a deferment. He went to Bran and explained. Bran listened. He said that forging only nails was beneath a blacksmith's dignity. Ethan said that a blacksmith's dignity is determined by the quality of the product, not its size. That a nail that doesn't bend or rust is more worthy than a sword that breaks in its first battle. Bran was silent for a long time. Then he grunted. Then he said, "All right." A week later, Ethan had 2 crates of select nails. Straight, strong, identical as brothers. He sent Roland with the crates to the fair in Westmarch. Roland returned 3 days later. With money. 120 gold pieces. Not much, but it was the first money the barony of Houghton had earned, rather than borrowed, in the last 5 years. Ethan counted the coins. He divided them into 3 piles. 40 for food, grain and salt. 40 for the reserve. 40 for Bran. Bran looked at the money and then at the Baron. He said he didn't need it. Ethan said he did. That a master craftsman should be paid for his work. That this wasn't charity but a share. Bran took the money. That evening, Martha told Ethan that Bran had bought his wife a new scarf for the first time in a year. The mill was finished on the 23rd day. The millstones were set in place. The grain was poured in. The wheel began to turn. The flour poured into the bin, white and fine. 3 times more than with the hand-cranked millstones. The women from Middle Houghton stood around watching. One of them was crying. She had been grinding grain by hand since she was 8, every day, her hands calloused up to her elbows, and now the wheel was turning, and the flour was pouring out on its own. Standing nearby was the village headman's daughter, red-haired, freckled, her hands calloused since she was 12, Emily Cartwright. She wasn't crying. She was looking at the mill with an expression Ethan knew well. It's the look people have when they see for the first time that the world can work differently. He walked up to her and asked if she knew how much grain was in the barns in Middle Houghton. She answered immediately, without hesitation. 17 sacks of wheat, 9 sacks of rye, 4 of barley. He asked how much flour that would yield. She calculated it in her head in 3 seconds. He asked how many days' supply that would last if they milled according to schedule. She answered and added that they needed to factor in the grain from Upper Houghton, which would be delivered in a week. Ethan looked at her, then at Roland, then back at her. Then he said he needed someone to run the mill, to keep records, to count the grain and flour, to keep track of the milling schedule, and that he wanted her to be the one. Emily blushed all the way to the roots of her hair. Roland opened his mouth and started to say something about how this wasn't women's work. Ethan cut him off, politely but firmly. He said that counting was a miller's job, and that he'd just seen Emily count better than anyone else in the village. Roland fell silent. Emily stood there, red-faced and silent. Then she said she agreed. Her voice trembled, but her back was straight. Ethan nodded. The first evening with the mill running. In Middle Houghton they were baking bread, white bread, made from the new flour. The smell wafted throughout the village. Ethan sat on the porch of the village elder's house. Leanne was hiding under her collar. They brought him a piece of bread. Hot. Soft. He took a bite. Ordinary bread. But for people who had been eating gray porridge and black flatbread for 3 years, it was a miracle. Children ran around with pieces in their hands. The old people chewed slowly and said nothing. One old woman crossed herself. Hidden under her collar, Leanne was also chewing on a crumb that Ethan had secretly slipped to her. She said the bread was delicious. Then she asked what would happen next. Ethan finished his piece. He looked at the river, at the mill, at the wheel turning in the twilight. He said that next came salt. Leanne asked why. Ethan explained. Salt means preservation. Salt means money. Salt is what keeps meat from rotting and fish from spoiling in a day. There's a salt spring in Houghton. The Baron's memory had recorded it. A small one. On the northern outskirts. No one used it because evaporating salt is expensive. It takes a lot of firewood and a lot of time. But Ethan knew an easier way. Freezing. Winter is just around the corner. You pour salt water into wide, flat troughs. You set them out in the frost. The water freezes, and the salt remains in solution. You drain off the brine. You repeat the process. The concentration increases. Then you evaporate the now concentrated brine. You need 5 times less firewood. Leanne listened. Then she said she didn't understand half the words, but she trusted that he knew what he was doing, because the mill was turning. Ethan smiled. The first month was over. The mill was running. Nails were selling. 120 gold pieces in the treasury. 3 months until winter. 2 until the payment to Moldvin. Not much. But yesterday he didn't even have a mill. The second month began with a visit Ethan hadn't expected. He was standing by the salt spring on the northern outskirts, marking out the area for the troughs, when Roland rode up. The village elder's face was ashen. He said that people had arrived in Little Houghton, 4 of them, on horseback, with the coat of arms of the West March Trade Guild. They said they were inspectors and that they needed to see the Baron. Ethan stuck his stick into the ground. He looked up at the sky, then at Roland. He asked what the coat of arms was. Roland described it. scales, and a hammer on a blue field. Ethan recalled his memories of the young baron, the West March Merchants Guild, a monopoly on the trade of iron, cloth, and grain in 3 counties. Anyone who sells without their seal pays a fine, or worse. So, nails. 120 gold pieces at the fair hadn't gone unnoticed. Someone had reported it. He told Leanne to hide. The fairy ducked into his pocket and fell silent. Ethan headed into the village. 4 men were waiting by the village headman's house. Their horses were well fed. Their cloaks were expensive. 2 of them had swords at their belts. Not soldiers, guards. The leader was a short, round man with oily eyes and a smile that didn't bode well. He introduced himself as Master Vogel, Inspector of Trade Standards for the 3rd District. Ethan greeted him, politely, calmly. Vogel smiled and spoke sweetly. He said he'd heard about the wonderful nails from Houghton, that the quality was impressive, that the guild was happy to see new craftsmen in the district. But there were certain formalities. Every craftsman trading within the guild's territory was required to have a license. The license cost 200 gold pieces a year, plus a guild tax of 20% on every sale, plus the right of first refusal. This means that the guild can buy out any batch of goods at a price it sets itself. Ethan listened and did the math. 200 gold for the license, 20% of sales, the right of first refusal. Under these conditions, every gold earned turned into 30 copper. This wasn't trade, it was strangulation. That was exactly how it was intended. The guild didn't want competitors. It wanted slaves or bankrupts. Ethan smiled at Vogel, the same smile he'd given the buyer at the factory in Cleveland who'd tried to sell him defective bearings at triple the price. A polite, calm, utterly inscrutable. He said he thanked Master Vogel for his explanation, that the barony of Houghton respected trading traditions, and that he would like to clarify one point. According to the guild's charter, a license is required to trade at guild fairs. But a direct sale between the baron and the buyer within the barony's territory is not subject to guild control. So it is written in paragraph 41 of the Imperial Trade Code, an old law, forgotten, but still in force. The young baron's memory came in handy. His uncle, the late baron, for all his faults, had a library, and in it were the imperial statutes. Ethan read them on the 2nd day after waking up. Vogel stopped smiling. His oily eyes turned sharp. He said that paragraph 41 hadn't been applied for 30 years. Ethan said that not being applied and not being repealed were 2 different things. Vogel said that the guild would not tolerate provocations from a penniless boy. Ethan said that the provocation was the forged order the inspectors had arrived with, because real inspectors carry the imperial seal, whereas Vogel's document bore the guild seal, which has no legal force. Silence. The guards exchanged glances. Vogel flushed. Then he turned pale. Then he smiled again. But the smile was different, subtle. He said he would convey the baron's message to Westmarch, and that the guild would find a way to resolve the matter. It was a threat. Ethan understood that, but he didn't show it. He said goodbye, politely. He watched as the 4 rode away. When the horses disappeared behind the hill, Roland approached and said that the baron was crazy, that the guild would crush them. Ethan said that was possible. But first, they had to finish the salt works, because salt is money, and money is the only thing the guild understands. He returned to the spring and continued marking out the layout. Leanne crawled out of his pocket. She said the men with swords were evil. Ethan said they weren't evil, but greedy. That's worse because greed never gets tired. For the next 2 weeks, he worked without stop. In the morning, the salt works. In the afternoon, the mill. In the evening, blueprints. At night, plans. His body was giving out. He coughed in the mornings. His stomach ached after every meal. His eyesight was failing. Leanne grumbled that he was killing himself. He said he'd rest later. She said that later he'd be dead. He didn't argue because she was right, but he couldn't stop. 2 months until winter. The salt works had to be up and running before the first frost. Otherwise, the freezing process wouldn't work. He recruited people from Upper Houghton, the 3rd village, the smallest one. 15 houses. This village was closest to the spring. The village headman there, an old man named Greg, didn't believe a word Ethan said, but his people had seen the mill. They'd seen the flour. They'd seen the bread. Rumors spread quickly through the villages. 6 men from Upper Houghton came on their own, without an invitation. They wanted to work. On the same terms as the mill workers, a share of the produce. Ethan agreed. The troughs for drying were made of wood. Wide, flat, like baking sheets. When Leanne touched the planks, the wood stopped letting water through. Ethan watched this every time and shook his head every time. In his world, you'd need epoxy for that. Here, a fairy and silvery light. The result was the same. They dug the channel from the spring to the site in 4 days. Salt water began flowing into the troughs. Now they needed a rose. Ethan waited. And while he waited, he kept himself busy with other things. The third village, Upper Houghton. He arrived there in the 3rd week of the 2nd month. It was small, poor. The houses are crooked, the fences are toppled, but the people are alive. And among them, Ethan found something important. A boy of about 14 who was sitting behind a house, carving a horse out of wood. The boy's knife was dull. The wood was knotty. But the horse was coming to life, with a mane, with muscles, with movement in its legs. Ethan watched his hands for 3 minutes. Then he asked his name. Jack. Ethan asked who had taught him. No one. He taught himself. Ethan nodded. He took a nail out of his pocket. That very one. The first one. He showed it to Jack. He asked if he could see the difference between this nail and an ordinary one. The boy took the nail. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at it. He said this one was smoother, and it shone differently, as if there were something inside it. Ethan took the nail back. He put it back in his pocket. He told Jack that in a month he would open a school at the castle, and that he needed a student. Jack asked, "A student of what?" Ethan said, "Of everything." The boy looked at him, not understanding, but he nodded. Ethan walked slowly back to the castle. His body ached. Leanne was silent. Then she asked why he needed a boy with a knife. Ethan explained. A person who sees a shape in a piece of wood isn't just a woodcarver. It's an eye. In his world, people like that became engineers, designers, architects. In this world, they became nobodies, because no one gave them a chance. Leanne thought for a moment and said he was strange. Ethan said he knew. That night, lying in bed, he made a list. What we have. The mill is running. Flour is coming in. Nails are being sold. The saltworks is almost ready. 14 people who saw the results and 6 more have come. Emily is keeping track of the mill. Bran is forging. Jack will start learning soon. What's needed? Money to pay Moldwyn. A lot. Fast. A healer. Because winter will bring sickness. Guards. Because the guild will return, and next time they won't be accompanied by inspectors. Firewood. Lots of firewood. Food. More food. What we have won't be enough for 400 people. He lay there, staring at the ceiling. The leak stain shaped like Australia was still there. Leanne was sleeping on his pillow, curled up in a ball. Small, silver, warm. He closed his eyes. 3 months ago, he had died on a bridge in Pittsburgh. Now he was the baron of a destitute barony in a world where magic belonged to the blood and knowledge was burned at the stake. His whole body ached. He had debts. He had enemies. He had 400 people who, for now, didn't know that he wouldn't let them die this winter. He wouldn't let them. In the morning, he got up and went to work. The first frosts came at the beginning of the 3rd month. Early. Ethan went out in the morning and saw frost on the grass. The air bit his cheeks. He smiled. He ran to the saltworks. 20 troughs stood on the platform, full of salt water. By lunchtime, the water had begun to freeze around the edges. The ice was fresh. Ethan checked it. He licked it. Water. Plain water. The salt remained in the liquid. He drained the unfrozen brine into a separate barrel. He poured in more water from the spring. He waited again. By the 3rd day, the brine in the barrel was thick and bitter from the salt. Ethan lit a fire under the cauldron. He poured in the brine. He let it evaporate slowly. By evening, a white layer lay at the bottom of the cauldron. Salt. He scraped it out. He tasted it. Pure, white, fine-grained. Better than that junk they sold at the fair for a gold piece a sack. He filled the first sack, 20 pounds. Then the second. Then the third. Workers from Upper Houghton stood around watching. One of them tasted the salt on his finger. He spat it out. Then he smiled. White, pure, no bitterness, doesn't crunch on your teeth. Ethan said this was just the beginning. Once the frosts set in for good, they'd be making 10 sacks a week. At the fair, salt like this would sell for 1.5 gold pieces per sack. Maybe 2. The man who'd tasted the salt did the math in his head and whistled. Ethan sent the first batch of salt to Westmarch with Roland. Not to the guild fair. Direct sales to innkeepers and butchers. Under paragraph 41. A direct deal. Without the guild seal. Roland left and returned 4 days later. With a sack of money. 320 gold pieces. Ethan counted it.
Then he counted it again.
Then he sat down in a chair and just breathed for a minute. 320. For a single shipment. The salt was worth more than he'd expected. Because it was better. Purer. Whiter. The butchers were fighting over it. Tavern owners were placing advance orders. One asked if he could buy some every month. Roland said yes. Ethan set the money aside. 100 for Moldvin's payment. Interest. 100 for grain and winter supplies. 60 for firewood. 60 for workers' wages and a reserve. The money was gone by the end of the evening. But for the first time in a long while, the books balanced. Not in the red. For the first time. He sat at the table and looked at the numbers. Leanne sat on a stack of coins, swinging her legs. She said that gold shone beautifully. Ethan said it shone even more beautifully when it was into food and warmth. Leanne thought about it and agreed. There was a month left until winter. Winter came like a wall. One day it was just cold. The next, knee-deep snow fell and the wind began to cut at his face like broken glass. Ethan stood on the castle porch and looked out at the white world. In Pittsburgh, he'd complained about winter. 5 below and black ice seemed like a catastrophe. Here it was 20 below. No central heating. No hot water. No double-paned windows. The castle's windows were covered with oiled cloth because half the shutters had rotted away. Drafts roamed the corridors like ghosts. The first week of winter exposed all the flaws. People were freezing. In the villages, houses were heated using open fires. The smoke drifted right into the room and escaped through a crack in the roof. Children were coughing. The elderly were coughing. They had enough firewood, but it was running out faster than he'd expected. That's because there were no stoves. There were hearths. Open ones. Inefficient ones. Half the heat went up the chimney, and the other half escaped into the ceiling. Ethan stood in Grandma Maeve's house in Little Houghton and looked at the hearth. Maeve was the oldest resident of the village. She was over 70. She sat by the fire in 3 layers of clothing and was still shivering. Her hands were blue from the cold. Her feet were wrapped in rags. She had slept by this hearth for the last 30 winters. Each winter, a little closer to the fire. Each winter, a little colder. Ethan looked at her and at the hearth. And in his mind, he pictured a stove, a Dutch oven, a compact brick stove with a system of flues inside. Hot air travels through the channels up and down before exiting through the chimney. The bricks heat up and give off heat for hours after the fire has gone out. It's 3 times more efficient than an open hearth. It uses half as much firewood. He had the bricks, or rather the clay. There was plenty of it along the shores of the Pacific. He just had to shape it, fire it, and assemble it. He returned to the castle and got to work on the blueprints. The Dutch was one of those things he knew not from textbooks, but from experience. At a reenactment festival in Ohio, he and his friends had built such a stove on a dare, in 2 days, using store-bought bricks and ready-mix. Here, there were no store-bought bricks. Here he had to start from scratch. Clay, shaping, drying, firing, then laying the bricks. He called for Bran. The blacksmith came. He looked at the blueprint. He said he wasn't a stonemason. Ethan said he didn't need a stove builder. He needed someone who knew how to work with heat and understood how the material behaved when heated. And that was a blacksmith. Bran grunted. It was his signature sound. It meant he didn't agree but would give it a try. For the next 3 days, they dug up clay. They kneaded it. They molded bricks in wooden frames. They dried them under a canopy. Leanne touched the raw bricks, and the clay compacted. Air bubbles disappeared. The texture became smooth. Ethan checked each brick by tapping it. A dull sound was bad. A ringing sound was good. Leanne made every brick ring. They fired them in a pit. The fire burned for 3 days. Bran monitored the temperature. Ethan explained that they had to raise the heat slowly. If they heated it too quickly, the bricks would crack. Out of the first batch of 100 bricks, 12 cracked. Out of the second, 3. Out of the third, Not a single one. Bran was a quick learner. By the 10th day, they had enough bricks for the first stove. Ethan chose Grandma Mev's house. It wasn't by chance. She was the oldest person in the village, the coldest house. If the stove could warm Granny Maeve, it could warm anyone. The four of them arrived. Ethan, Bran, Jack, whom Ethan had already begun to teach, and Ted, whose leg had healed and who now followed Ethan around like a shadow. They dismantled the old hearth, carried out the stones, prepared the foundation. Ethan laid out the lines. Bran laid the bricks. Jack mixed the mortar. Ted passed them the bricks. They worked for 2 days. Ethan would lie on the floor and check the level using water in a bowl. Every row, every brick. The flue channels inside were key. 5 turns. Hot air rises. Then it goes down. Then up. Then down. Then into the flue. Each turn transfers heat to the bricks. When the stove was finished, Ethan lit the first fire. A small one. A test run. The smoke rose evenly. The draft was working. The fire didn't send smoke into the room. After an hour, the bricks were warm. After 2 hours, they were hot. He put out the fire. 3 hours later, the stove was still giving off heat. Grandma Maeve stood in the corner and watched. She'd come over when they started dismantling the hearth and hadn't left for 2 days. Silently, she cooked porridge for them over the fire in the yard. Silently, she brought them water. When the stove started working, she walked over, slowly. She reached out and touched the warm brick with her palm. Dry, wrinkled, old. She stood there for a minute. Then she said that for the first time in 30 years, her feet weren't cold. Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't crying. She just said it, like a fact. And that was scarier than any tears. Ethan stood nearby, a nail in his pocket, Leanne on his shoulder. Little, silver. She was looking at Granny Maeve too. Then Ethan saw that Leanne was crying. Silently, silver tears on silver cheeks. He didn't ask why. He knew. 1,000 years ago, Leanne had tried to help people. For that, they'd locked her away. Now she was helping again, and no one was locking her up. On the contrary, Granny Maeve held out a piece of bread in the palm of her hand. Leanne looked at the bread, then at Granny Maeve. Then she took it, took a bite, chewed slowly. They were standing in a small, warm house on the edge of a starving barony in the middle of winter. 4 laborers, 1 old woman, 1 fairy, and a young baron with a nail in his pocket. News of the stove spread through the villages within a day. By the evening of the next day, 5 people came to Ethan. They asked for one just like it. He said they needed bricks. They needed time. He needed helping hands. They said they'd help. Ethan nodded. He began to calculate. About 200 bricks for each stove. 3 villages. About 100 houses in need. That's 20,000 bricks. At the current production rate, that would take half a year. They couldn't wait half a year. People were freezing right now. He sat in his office that evening thinking. Leanne hung nearby, gnawing on a piece of dry bread. Then he stood up and went to see Bran. It was nighttime. Bran wasn't asleep. He was sitting by the forge, sharpening a chisel. Ethan said he needed a kiln to fire bricks. A big one. A permanent one. Not a pit, but a real kiln. With a capacity of 500 bricks at a time. Bran looked at him. Then at the clock. There was no clock, but the look was the same. Ethan said he'd draw up a blueprint by morning. Bran said the Baron was crazy. Ethan said he'd been told that before. Bran snorted. Ethan returned to the castle and drew until dawn. A ring kiln. A simplified version. Without a rotating hearth. But with 2 chambers. While one chamber is firing, the other is being loaded. A continuous cycle. 500 bricks per load. 2 days to fire. 1,000 bricks a week. 20,000 in 20 weeks. It takes a long time, but it's 10 times faster than in a pit. In the morning, he showed the blueprint to Bran and Ted. Ted didn't understand half of it. Bran understood everything. He grunted, said, "Let's get started." While they were building the brick kiln, winter continued to bear down on them. Every day, Ethan checked their supplies. Grain, flour, salt, firewood, turnips, dried fish. He calculated the daily consumption. He calculated how much was left. He calculated when it would run out. Emily helped. She turned out to be more than just a good bookkeeper. She was an excellent logistics manager. She distributed the flour among the villages based on the number of mouths to feed. She made sure no one took more than their share. She recorded everything, every sack, every pound. When someone from Upper Houghton tried to steal a sack of grain from the warehouse, Emily caught him by the numbers. The tally was off by 3 pounds. She found the thief in 2 hours. Ethan didn't punish him. He sat the man down across from him and asked why. The man was a strapping fellow with 3 children. He said his children were hungry and the ration was too small. Ethan asked Emily how much grain a family of 5 was supposed to receive. She told him. Ethan nodded. He increased the ration for families with children by 10%. He said there was no need to steal. You just had to speak up. The man looked at him, confused. Barons don't talk to thieves. Barons hang thieves. This baron was sitting across from him and increasing the ration. The man left without a word. 3 days later, he came to the mill and asked if there was any work. Emily gave him a job, hauling sacks. He hauled them. He didn't steal anymore. In the 3rd week of winter, Ethan himself fell ill. His body gave out. Fever, cough, chills. He lay in bed and couldn't get up. Leanne fluttered around him, panicking. She didn't know how to treat people. She knew how to treat things, wood, metal, stone, but not flesh. Martha brewed him a decoction from some herbs. It was bitter and didn't help. On the 2nd day of his illness, Ethan realized he needed a doctor. There was no doctor in Houghton. The nearest physician was in Westmarch, a 2-day journey away, and he wouldn't travel to a destitute barony just for a sick young baron. He lay there, coughing, and thought that this was how foolishly his second life would end. On the 3rd day, a woman arrived at the castle. Young, quiet. Her black hair was tied back in a ponytail. Her eyes were dark and attentive. Behind her back was a bag from which bundles of herbs protruded. Martha let her in because the woman said she was an herbalist and that she'd heard about the sick baron. It was unclear where she'd heard it. Ethan lay in a semi-delirious state. The woman entered. She sat down beside him. She placed her hand on his forehead. Her hand was cool and dry. She examined him, his throat, his chest, his stomach, in silence. Then she took a small clay pot out of the bag. She mixed the powder with hot water. She gave it to him to drink. It was bitter, but different from Martha's herbs. Then she brewed another decoction, for his chest, a compress made from a 3rd mixture, all in silence, precise, without any unnecessary movements. Like a surgeon, Ethan watched her through the fever and the haze. He saw her hands, steady, calm. That's how people work who know what they're doing. He asked her name. Sora Jeon. He asked where she was from. From the Eastern lands, the Korean community, a wandering herbalist. He asked why she had come. She paused. Then she said she'd heard about the baron who builds mills and makes white salt, and that she'd become curious. Ethan coughed and said that her curiosity had brought her just in time. Sora didn't smile, but the corners of her lips twitched slightly. She nursed him for 3 days. She gave him herbal teas. She changed his compresses. She monitored his temperature, not with a thermometer because there wasn't one, but by his pulse, his sweat, and the color of his skin. Ethan was getting better. On the 2nd day, he was able to sit up. On the 3rd, to stand. On the 4th, he went out into the yard. Week 4th, he went out into the yard. Weak, but alive. Sora was packing her bag. Ethan asked where she was going. She said further on. Down the road. Ethan asked why. She said that's how she lives. She goes from village to village, treats whoever she can, then moves on. Ethan asked why she wouldn't stay. Sora was silent for a long time. Then she said she doesn't treat those who hold a title. He asked why. She answered briefly. My brother. He treated an aristocrat. It didn't help. He was executed. Since then, she hasn't treated anyone with a title. Ethan nodded. Then he said one thing. He said he trusted her, that she had cured him and he was alive, that if she had made a mistake, it would have been his mistake, not hers, because he had asked for her help. and that he needed a healer. Not for himself. For the 400 people who will fall ill this winter. For the children who are coughing. For the elderly whose bones ache. For the women who give birth without help. Sora stood there with a bag slung over her shoulder. She looked at him. For a long time. Then she set the sack down on the ground. She said she'd stay until spring. She'd see how it went. If she liked it, she'd stay longer. If not, she'd leave. Ethan said it was a fair deal. Sora nodded. And she stayed. That same week, children in Middle Houghton fell ill. 7 of them. Coughing, fever, vomiting. Sora went. Ethan went with her. Even though his legs were still giving out. He carried her bag of herbs because the bag was heavy and Sora was small. She looked at him and shook her head. A baron carrying a herbalist's bag along a muddy road in the freezing cold. This world has definitely gone mad. She treated the children for 4 days. All 7 survived. The mothers wept. One tried to give Sora her only chicken. Sora refused. Ethan later asked why she had refused. Sora said she doesn't accept payment from those who have nothing to give. Ethan said nothing. Then he said he was assigning her a stipend from the barony's treasury. 20 gold pieces a month. Sora said that was too much. Ethan said it was too little for 7 children's lives. Sora looked at him. She sipped the tea she drank that evening especially slowly and deliberately. Winter dragged on. Cold, dark, long. But no one died in Houghton. The mill turned. There was flour. Salt was sold. Firewood was delivered. The brick kiln began operating, and new Dutch stoves appeared in homes one after another. 2 a week. Then 3. People came and helped, not because Ethan ordered them to, but because they saw the results. Granny Maeve in a warm house. The children Sora had cured. White bread made from mill-ground flour. Nails that wouldn't bend. Salt that wasn't bitter. Every single thing was proof. Silent. Irrefutable. By midwinter, outsiders began arriving in Houghton. 2 carpenters from a neighboring barony. They'd heard that here people were paid for their work and weren't beaten. A family with 3 children. They'd fled from Baron Moldwyn. They said it was hungry and scary there. An old man. A cooper. Alone. Without a family. He said he knew how to make barrels and that he needed a roof over his head. Ethan took everyone in. He gave them work. He gave them food. He gave them a place to stay. Roland grumbled that the barony couldn't sustain it. Ethan showed him the numbers. Every new worker produced more than he consumed, if given a tool and a task. Roland looked at the numbers and didn't believe them, but the numbers added up. Emily confirmed it. And Emily was never wrong about numbers. Never. By the end of winter, there were 500 gold pieces in the barony's treasury. Not much by the county's standards. A huge sum for Houghton. It was enough to pay Moldwyn's interest. It was enough to buy grain for the spring sowing. It was enough to pay everyone who had worked. Ethan sat at the table, counting. Leanne sat on the inkwell, swinging her legs. Sora drank tea by the window. Snow was falling outside. Quiet. White. Spring was a month away. A new chapter would begin in a month. But now, right now, this very evening, it was warm in Houghton. No one had died. No one was starving. For the first time in a decade. Spring arrived with the mud. The snow was melting, and the roads had turned into rivers of brown slush. There were still no horses in Houghton. People were churning up the mud with their boots. Ethan stood on the castle porch and looked out at the courtyard. The courtyard had changed over the winter. The trash pile had been cleared away. The gate had been repaired. They'd been hung on both hinges. The south wall had been shored up with a buttress made of stone and logs. It was a temporary fix, but it was holding. He breathed in the damp air and made a mental list for spring. First, planting. The fields had been overgrown for 3 years. They needed to be plowed. They needed to be sown. It had to be done right. Ethan Clark remembered something he'd read for his blog. The 3-field system. 1 field is sown with winter crops, the second with spring crops. The third lies fallow. Rotation every year. The soil doesn't get depleted. The harvest is stable. Here, the farmers sowed the same thing in the same field until the land died. Then they abandoned the field and cleared a new one from the forest. Barbaric. He gathered the village elders. Roland from Middle Houghton, Greg from Upper Houghton. There was no village elder from Little Houghton. There was Bran. The blacksmith had effectively become the most important person in the village because people went to him for nails, and everyone needs nails. Ethan spread a map out before them, drawn by hand, rough, but accurate. Fields, rivers, villages, the forest. He explained the three-field rotation, slowly, step by step. He drew little lines on the parchment. Here's a field. Here are 3 parts. The first year, wheat here. Here, peas. Here, nothing. In the second year, we rotate the crops. Peas add nitrogen to the soil. Ethan didn't say the word nitrogen. He said that peas feed the earth. After the peas, the earth yields better wheat. Roland listened with his mouth agape. Greg listened with his mouth shut. Bran grunted. Then Roland asked how the Baron knew this. Ethan said he'd read it. Roland asked where. Ethan said in old books. It was true.
Only the books were from another world.
Second, roads. The mud between the villages was so bad that a wagon would sink up to its axle. Goods couldn't be transported. People couldn't get through. A road was needed. At least one. From the castle to Middle Houghton, 3 miles. Ethan knew how the Romans built roads. A foundation of large stones. A layer of gravel, a layer of sand. Tamped gravel on top. Drainage ditches on either side. A road that doesn't sink into the mud. Isn't washed away by rain. Lasts for decades. He explained this to the village elders. Greg said there weren't enough stones. Ethan said there were. A limestone hill to the north. There's enough stone there for 10 roads. We just need to quarry it and break it up. Roland said there wouldn't be enough people. Ethan said there would be enough if they worked according to a schedule. 2 shifts. One breaks the stone, the other lays it. They switch every other day. He drew up a schedule, wrote it on parchment. Names, days, sections. Roland took the parchment and stared at it for a long time. Then he said that no baron in his life had ever drawn up schedules for the men. Ethan said he wasn't a baron. He was the manager.
Baron was just a word on a document.
Roland looked at him strangely, then he nodded. Work got underway. The fields were plowed by men. There were no oxen. There were no horses. 12 men pulled the plow instead of livestock. Ethan stood at the edge of the field and watched. He felt ashamed. People instead of oxen. In the 21st century, he would have been prosecuted for this. But this wasn't the 21st century. Here there was a choice. Plow with people or not plow at all. Not plowing meant going hungry in the fall. He promised himself that by next spring there would be horses in Houghton, or oxen, or something to replace both. The thought of a steam engine flashed through his mind and faded. Too soon. Way too soon. It would require precision metalworking. Seals were needed. A lathe was needed. A steam engine was 10 years away, if he was lucky. A road ran parallel to the fields. Stone was quarried on the hill. It was hauled on sleds. They crushed it into gravel with hammers. Ethan showed them how to dig drainage ditches, how to tamp down the foundation, how to lay the layers. The work was hard and slow, but every day the road grew by 20 paces.
Ethan marked their progress with sticks along the roadside. People saw the sticks. They saw how their number grew. That motivated them better than any words could. In mid-spring, something important happened. Amy came to see Ethan. She stood in the doorway of the office, wringing out her apron. Her face was red. Her eyes were determined. She said she had a problem. The mill was working well, too well. There was more flour than Houghton could eat. They needed to sell it. But they couldn't sell it at the fair. The guild wouldn't allow it. She could sell directly, but she needed to find buyers, and she didn't know how. Ethan listened and smiled. Not because the problem was funny, because it was a good problem. Too much product, in a world where everyone is starving. He told Emily that she needed a business partner, someone who knows the market, knows the buyers, knows how to get around the guild without breaking the law. Emily asked where she could find someone like that. Ethan said he knew where. Westmarch, the Korean trading community. He'd heard about them from the young baron's memories. Settlers from the east. They live in their own neighborhood. They trade in fabrics and spices. The guild doesn't like them, but tolerates them because they pay taxes and stay out of local politics. They have their own connections, their own roots, their own customers. Ethan set out for Westmarch, his first trip beyond the barony's borders. Leanne hid in his pocket. Sora gave him a small bag of herbs for his cough. Anna Brandt. He remembered her, a former sergeant in the Imperial Infantry, stripped of her rank, a drinker, somewhere on the roads between Houghton and Westmarch. He hadn't forgotten. He'd been looking for her since the very first month.
He'd questioned the merchants who came for salt. A woman, tall, a scar across her eyebrow. A drinker. No one knew, or no one wanted to say. The journey to West March took 2 days on foot. Ethan walked, cursing the lack of a horse. His body had grown stronger over the winter. Not by much, but enough to walk 20 miles without passing out. Progress. West March turned out to be a home to 15,000 people. By local standards, the capital. Stone walls, gates bearing the Count's coat of arms, a market in the square, the smell of manure and roasted meat. Crowded, noisy. Ethan felt like he was at the Chicago World's Fair. Only instead of booths with robots, there were stalls selling turnips. He found the Korean Quarter on the eastern outskirts. Narrow streets. Clean. Signs in 2 languages. The smell was different. Pungent. Spicy. Familiar. In his past life, he'd eaten kimchi every Friday at a diner near the office. There was no kimchi here, but the smell of pepper and garlic was the same. The Han Trading House, the largest in the quarter. 2 stories, with a courtyard, with a stable. Ethan knocked. A servant opened the door. Ethan introduced himself. Baron Houghton, here to see the head of the house on business. The servant looked at him, at his patched doublet, at his muddy boots, at his thin, pale face. He closed the door. 5 minutes later, he opened it again. He ushered him inside. The head of the Khan Trading House was a man in his 50s, lean, upright, with a short gray beard and eyes that assessed everything. The value of the doublet, the value of the boots, the value of the person wearing them. A young woman sat beside him, 20 years old, black-haired. She had the poise of a dancer, eyes like her father's, appraising yet with a spark. Min-Soo Han, his daughter. Ethan sat down across from them. The head of the household asked what the Baron wanted. Ethan placed a small bag on the table. He untied it and poured out the salt, white, fine-grained, pure. The head of the household looked at the salt. He took a pinch, rubbed it between his fingers, tasted it on his tongue. His expression didn't change, but Ethan noticed his fingers twitch. He recognized the quality. Min-Soo tasted it too, and she too showed no reaction, but the pencil in her fingers wavered slightly. Ethan said he had salt. A lot of it. 10 sacks a week in winter, 5 in summer. Consistent quality. The price is a third below market value. He's looking for a business partner to sell outside the guild fair. Direct deals under paragraph 41. The head of the house remained silent. Min-Soo remained silent. Then the head of the house said that paragraph 41 was a dangerous game. The guild does not forgive those who trade outside its system. Ethan said that the guild does not forgive competitors, but it tolerates partners, if the partner is valuable enough. The head of the house asked what else the Baron had besides salt. Ethan took out a second pouch. Nails. 10 of them. He placed them on the table. The head of the house picked one up. He turned it over in his hand. He tried to bend it. He couldn't. He looked at Ethan differently. Min-Soo took a nail and did the same. Then she put it down and spoke her first words of the entire conversation. She said that no blacksmith in West March had iron like this. Ethan looked at her. She looked at him. He said that in 6 months, he would have more than just salt and nails. He would have cloth. He would have glass. He would have paper. He wasn't building a shop. He was building a trading house. And he needed a partner who knew how to do the math. The head of the household leaned back in his chair. Min-Soo leaned forward. Ethan saw the difference. His father was thinking about the risks. His daughter was thinking about the possibilities. He turned to Min-Soo directly. He said he wanted to sign a contract with the Han Trading House for the supply of salt and iron goods for 1 year, with the right to renew, and that he wanted her to handle the contract, personally. Silence. The head of the household looked at his daughter. Min-Soo looked at her father, then at Ethan. Then she said that the Baron was either very clever or very brazen. Ethan said that one didn't rule out the other. Min-Soo didn't smile, but the spark in her eyes grew brighter. The head of the house said he'd think it over. Ethan said he had 3 days. After that, he'd leave and look for another partner. It was a bluff. There was no other partner. But the head of the house didn't know that. They shook hands 2 days later. A 1-year contract. Salt and nails. Min-Soo was in charge. Ethan signed the contract and addressed Min-Soo in front of her father. He called her Mrs. Han, officially, as an equal business partner. The head of the household remained silent throughout dinner. Min-Soo walked Ethan to the gate. She stood on the porch and watched him walk away. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just watched. On his way back, he stopped at a roadside tavern. Dirty, dark, reeking of beer and sweat. A woman was sitting at a table in the back. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar across her eyebrow. An empty mug stood in front of her, and 3 more empty ones beside it. Anna Brandt. Ethan sat down across from her. Anna looked up. Her eyes were cloudy, drunken, but something lived deep within them, something neither shame nor 5 years in the sewers had been able to kill. Ethan placed his wallet on the table. 10 gold pieces, all that was left of his travel money. Anna looked at the wallet, then at him. He said he didn't need a soldier who kills on command. He needed a captain who would say no when necessary. Anna looked at him. A minute passed. Leanne fell silent in her pocket. Ethan waited. Anna finished her beer. She set down the mug. She stood up. She swayed a little, straightened up, said he should lead the way. They left the tavern together. The journey home took a day and a half. Anna walked in silence. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask why. She just walked. When they reached Houghton and Anna saw the mill and the road and the new roofs in the village, she stopped. She looked for a long time. Then she said it wasn't as bad here as she'd expected. Ethan said it had been worse. Anna nodded. That was enough for her. Ethan gave her a room in the castle, right next to hers. In the morning, Anna stepped out into the courtyard, sober. Her hair was wet. The scar looked even more terrifying now that she was sober. She asked where the guards were. Ethan pointed them out. 3 old men and a teenager with a rusty spear. Anna looked at them, then at Ethan. She said that wasn't a guard, it was a misunderstanding. Ethan said that was why he needed a captain. Anna said she needed weapons, armor, men, time. Ethan said there would be weapons. Bran was forging them. There would be armor. Later, there were men, from among those who'd arrived over the winter. 10 men ready to learn. Time. 3 months before the guild decided that words weren't enough and sent not inspectors but men with me. Anna nodded. She went out into the courtyard. She looked at the 10 men. She told them to line up. They lined up. Crooked. She told them to stand up straight. They stood up straight. She walked along the line, looked each one in the face. Then she said that in a month they'd be running 10 miles without getting out of breath, or she'd personally drown them in the quiet river. The 10 exchanged glances. Ethan stood on the porch and watched. Leanne, perched on his shoulder, was watching too. She whispered that this woman was scary. Ethan said that was exactly why they needed her. The summer of the first year was a time when Houghton began to change rapidly, so rapidly that Ethan sometimes caught himself thinking he couldn't keep up with his own plans. The road from the castle to Middle Houghton was completed by midsummer. 3 miles of compacted gravel, drainage ditches on either side. The wagon rolled along without a jolt. The road didn't get waterlogged when it rained. The men who built it walked along it and couldn't believe their eyes. Roland walked it from start to finish, back and forth. Then he said that in 50 years of life, he'd never seen a road like it. Ethan said this was only the first one. Minso arrived 2 weeks after the contract was signed, on horseback, with 2 servants and a trunk full of ledgers. Ethan met her at the gate. She dismounted. She looked around the castle, the courtyard, the walls. She said she'd imagined a worse place. Ethan said it had been worse a month ago. She walked through the castle, peeked into every room. The pantry, the kitchen, the study. She opened the trunk containing the I.O.Us. She read for an hour, in silence. Ethan sat nearby and waited. Leanne was hiding. Minsu mustn't know about the ferry, not yet. Minsu closed the chest and said 3 things. First, the debts are poorly structured. Some can be restructured. Some can be contested. The interest rates on 3 of the IOUs are illegally inflated, even by local standards. Second, revenue from salt and nails is growing, but so are expenses. We need an accounting system, a proper one, not just tally marks on slips of paper, but double-entry bookkeeping. Debit, credit, balance. Third, Moldwyn. He holds the largest debt, $5,000 in principal plus interest. Moldwyn doesn't want money, he wants land. He'll keep pressuring us. We need a strategy. Ethan listened and nodded. Then he said he had a strategy. grow faster than Moldwyn can apply pressure, become so valuable to the county that Count Westmarch won't let Moldwyn take Houghton, because that would mean losing the best salt and the best iron in the county. Minso thought about it. Then she said it was risky. Ethan said everything was risky. Minso said she liked risky plans, as long as there was math behind them. She stayed. She took a room on the second floor. She set up a table. She laid out her books, and she began to count everything, every bag of flour, every pound of salt, every nail, every hour of work by every person. A week later, she had a complete accounting of the barony, the first in its history. She showed Ethan the final spreadsheet, revenue, expenses, balance sheet, inventory, and a 3-month forecast. Ethan looked at the numbers and felt what he only at the best factories, when chaos turns into a system, when you stop guessing and start knowing. He told Minso that she was a genius. Minso said she was an accountant. It's the same thing, but it sounds more modest. Roland saw the spreadsheet and almost cried. He said that didn't happen, that the numbers couldn't add up. Minsu said they could if you calculated correctly. Roland walked around for 2 weeks muttering to himself. Ethan assigned Emily to work with Minsu, to learn, to pick up the ropes. Emily learned eagerly, grasping everything on the first try. Minsu was a strict teacher. She didn't scold, but she didn't praise either. She simply pointed out the mistake and waited for Emily to find the solution on her own. They got into a rhythm within a week. By midsummer, Ethan had a team. Bran was forging. Emily managed the mill and the books. Minsu handled finances and trade. Sora treated the sick. Anna trained the guards. Leanne improved materials at night when no one was watching. Everyone was in their place. Everyone did what they did best. Ethan coordinated. Morning rounds. The mill. The saltworks. The smithy. The road construction site. The training yard. The school he'd opened on the castle's ground floor. 10 children. Jack was among them. He taught them himself. Reading and writing, arithmetic, the basics of geometry, technical drawing. The children looked at him as if he were crazy when he drew a triangle on the blackboard and said that the sum of the angles was always the same. Then they checked it, and they believed him. Jack learned faster than anyone else. Within a month, he was drawing better than half the adults. After 2 months, Ethan gave him his first assignment, to draw a blueprint for a stool with dimensions. Jack drew it, neatly and precisely. Ethan hung the blueprint on the wall of his office. It was the first blueprint not drawn by him. The first step toward ensuring that knowledge would no longer depend on a single person. That summer, news arrived that changed the Minso, brought back information from Westmarch. Baron Moldwyn was buying up Houghton's debts, everyone he could find, through frontmen, quietly, systematically. He was amassing a critical mass. Once he had enough, he would present them all at once, demand payment, and when Ethan couldn't pay, he would seize the land by law. Minso laid it all out before Ethan the way a surgeon lays out his instruments. Cold, precise, emotionless. Here are the amounts. Here are the deadlines. Here are the names of the frontmen. Here's how much he's already collected. Here's how much is left. Ethan listened. Then he asked how much time they had. Minso said 4 months, maybe 5. After that, Moldwyn will strike. Ethan stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the yard, at the mill in the distance, at the road, at the fields turning green with the first harvest in 3 years. 4 months. He turned and said they needed to speed things up. They needed a new product, something that would bring in a lot of money quickly, something no one else had. Minso asked what. Ethan thought about it for 3 days. Then he found the answer. Paper, not parchment. Paper. Parchment was made from animal hides. Expensive. Time-consuming. 1 sheepskin, 1 sheet. Paper was made from rags. Cheap, fast. 1 cauldron of rags, 100 sheets. There was no paper in this world. There was parchment. Expensive. Rare. Accessible only to the nobility and the church. If Ethan could make paper, cheap paper, in large quantities, then every merchant, every official, every county administrator would become his customer. Because conducting business on parchment is like writing with gold ink. Beautiful, but ruinously expensive. He knew the process. He'd read about it for his blog. The rags. The pulp is soaked in lye. It's boiled down. It's ground into a pulp. The pulp is poured onto a frame with a mesh. The water drains off. The sheet dries. It's pressed. Paper. Lye is ash and water. He has ash. He has water. He needs to collect rags. He needs to make frames with mesh. He needs to build a press. He called Bran. He showed him a sketch of the press. Bran looked at it and said he could have it ready in a week. Ethan called Emily. He told her to collect all the old rags from the villages, dresses that were no longer worn, torn sacks, rotten ropes, anything made of fabric. Emily went and returned 2 days later with a cart full of rags. People gave them away willingly. Why keep a bag full of holes if the Baron says it can be turned into something useful? They started work 10 days later. A cauldron of lye. The rags were boiling. It stank. It stank terribly. Leanne sat on the workshop roof and refused to come down. She said the people who came up with this were mad. Ethan said this wasn't even the smelliest production process he knew of. Leanne said she didn't want to know what the smelliest one was. Grinding was a problem. In his world, they used a watermill with hammers for that. Here, the mill was busy grinding flour. They needed a second one. Or another solution. Ethan found another one. A mortar and pestle, large ones, made of stone. 3 workers took turns pounding the pulp in the mortars, slowly, inefficiently. But it worked. The first sheet of paper came out on the 4th day of production. Crooked, thick, gray, with flecks of unground rags. Ethan held it in his hands and smiled. Minsu stood nearby. She looked at the sheet. She touched it. She said it wasn't paper. It was a rag with pretensions. Ethan said it was the first attempt, and that in a week it would be better. A week later, it was better. The sheets became thinner, smoother, whiter. Leanne would come down at night and touch the pulp in the vats. The fibers were aligning. They intertwined more tightly. The paper turned out smooth, durable. You could write on both sides. Minso took the first good sheet. She wrote a column of numbers on it. She looked at it, held it up to the light, ran her finger over the surface. Then she said quietly that she needed 20 such sheets, right away. Ethan gave her 30. She transcribed the barony's entire half-yearly ledger onto paper, in a single evening. What had previously taken 10 sheets of parchment, each worth 1 gold piece, fit onto 30 sheets of paper worth 3 copper pieces. Minso sat poring over the papers. Then she looked up and said that this thing would change the world. Ethan said he knew. The first batch of paper was sent to Westmarch a month later. 100 sheets. Minso sold them for 40 gold pieces. The following week, an order came in for another 500, then 1,000. Merchants, notaries, estate managers. Everyone wanted paper. Cheap, convenient, lightweight. Money flowed like a river, a thin one, but a real one. By the end of summer, there were 2,000 gold pieces in the treasury. The debts to Moldwyn still hung over them, but the gap was narrowing. Ethan sat in his study that evening. Before him lay a map of the barony, updated, with a road, with a mill, with a salt works, with a paper workshop, with a blacksmith shop, with a brick kiln, with a school. 6 months ago, there was nothing here. Now there was a system, small, fragile, but alive. Leanne sat on the map and traced the lines of the roads with her finger. She asked what he was thinking about. Ethan said he was thinking about glass. Leanne asked what glass was. Ethan took an empty bottle from the shelf. Cloudy, thick, warped, local glass. Junk. He said that glass is molten sand, and that real glass is as clear as water. You can make windows out of it that you can see through, dishes that don't stink, and a mirror. Leanne froze. She asked what a mirror was. Ethan explained. A flat piece of glass coated with silver. You look into it and see yourself, like in water, only clearly. Leanne was silent. Then she said very quietly that she had never seen herself in her entire life. She didn't know what she looked like. Ethan looked at her, small, silvery, with eyes the color of melted water. She had lived 1,000 years and had never once seen her own face. He said the glass-blowing workshop would be next. Leanne said he shouldn't build the workshop just for her sake. Ethan said he wasn't building it for her sake. Glass is money. Glass is windows. Glass is a laboratory for Sora. But a mirror would be the first thing they made. Leanne turned away. Ethan noticed her shoulders trembling slightly. He didn't look. He just went back to the blueprints. The fall of the first year brought both a harvest and problems. The harvest was good. The 3-field system had worked. The wheat in the fields that had been left fallow for 2 years grew 1.5 times taller than on the neighboring lands. The rye was sturdy. The peas were plentiful. The farmers walked between the rows and touched the ears of grain with their hands.
Roland stood at the edge of the field and said nothing. Then he took off his hat. Then he put it back on. Then he took it off again. He couldn't believe that the land, which had been considered dead, had yielded such a bountiful harvest. Ethan stood nearby and didn't say that this was only the beginning. That in 2 years, with fertilizer and proper crop rotation, the harvest would double again. It was too soon. They wouldn't understand. One miracle at a time. The problems were of a different kind. In early fall, news broke in Westmarch. Houghton paper. Cheap, high quality, plenty of it. The guild grew alarmed. Salt was one thing. Nails were another. Trifles. Paper was a blow to the monopoly of the parchment workshops, and the workshops belonged to the guild. Vogel returned, this time without his oily smile. With a sheet of paper in his hand, with Houghton paper, he arrived with 10 horsemen, not inspectors, guards, real ones. With swords and crossbows, they stopped at the castle gates. Anna went out to meet them. She stood in the doorway, alone, her hand on the hilt, calm as a wall. Vogel demanded a meeting with the Baron. Anna said the Baron was busy. Vogel said the guild demanded an immediate halt to unlicensed paper production. A fine of 500 gold pieces, confiscation of the equipment. In case of refusal, the guild would appeal to Count Westmarch. Anna listened. Then she turned and went back into the castle. She returned 5 minutes later. She said that the Baron was inviting Master Vogel to dinner. Alone, without guards. Vogel flushed. Then he turned pale. Then he dismounted and went inside. The guards remained outside the gates. Anna closed the gates herself. Dinner was interesting. Ethan was sitting at the table. Vogel was across from him. Between them stood a plate of bread, white bread made from Houghton flour, a pitcher of water, and 2 glasses, glass, misshapen, cloudy, made from local glass. Ethan began. He said he understood the guild's concerns. That paper was a new product, and the guild didn't know how to regulate it. That was normal. He proposed a solution. Not confrontation. Partnership. Vogel listened. His eyes were dull but attentive. Ethan placed a sheet of paper on the table. Blank. White. Smooth. He said that Houghton paper was 10 times cheaper than parchment. This wasn't competition with the parchment workshops. It was a different market. Parchment is for the nobility, for documents with seals, for royal decrees. Paper is for merchants, for record keeping, for letters, for schools. 2 products, 2 markets. They don't interfere with each other. Vogel said that the guild decides what constitutes interference and what doesn't. Ethan said that the guild decides what's in the guild's best interest, and that he has something to offer the guild. 20% of paper sales. Not a tax, a partnership share. The guild gets money without doing any work. Houghton gets legitimacy. Vogel thought. Ethan saw the cogs turning behind those oily eyes. 20% of a growing market is more than a fine. A fine is a one-time thing. A share is forever. Vogel said he'd pass the proposal on to the guild council. He left. Ethan sat at the table and finished his water. Leanne peeked out from behind the curtain. She said the oily man was nasty. Ethan said the oily man was greedy. And greedy people can be bought. It's easier than fighting. Minso walked in a minute later. She said that 20% was too much. Ethan said he knew, but right now, he needed time. Not money, time to grow. Once they've grown enough, the terms can be renegotiated. Minsu nodded. She said that sounded like a merchant's way of thinking. Ethan said that's exactly what he was, a merchant. Just one with a title. The guild accepted the offer 2 weeks later, 20%. The paperwork was legal. Houghton got a breather. But Ethan knew it was only temporary. The guild isn't a partner. The guild is a parasite looking for the right moment to devour its host. We need to grow faster. Glass. He started in mid-fall. He found sand on the shore of the Pacific. Clean. Fine-grained. Almost white. Not perfect, but usable. He built a furnace. A small one. His first. With a blast from blacksmith's bellows. Sand has a higher melting point than iron. He needed more heat. Bran helped. He rebuilt the furnace, added a second bellows, a third. The heat turned white. The sand began to flow. The first glass bead was made on the 3rd day. Crooked.
Cloudy, with bubbles, but glass. Ethan held it in the palm of his hand and looked through it at the light. Distorted, blurred, but the light passed through. Glass. Leanne flew over. She touched the bead. A glow. The bubbles disappeared. The cloudiness vanished. The bead became clear, transparent, like a drop of water. Ethan twirled it between his fingers. Then he set it on the table and told Bran they needed a glass blower's pipe. A long one, made of iron, hollow. Bran grunted. He made it in a day. They'd been blowing glass for a week. In his past life, Ethan had seen glass blowers at a festival. Once. He'd remembered the principle. You gather a drop of molten glass at the end of the tube. You blow. You twist. You shape it. Simple in theory, incredibly difficult in practice. The first 10 attempts were a disaster. The glass would fall. It would shatter. It warped. Bran burned his hand. Ethan burned both of his. Sora treated them every evening and told them they were both crazy. On the 11th try, a glass took shape. Crooked. Thick-walled. But a glass. Bran set it on the workbench and held it up to the light. Transparent. Real. He said he hadn't seen anything like it in 30 years in the forge. Ethan said this was just the beginning. A month later, they were making 5 glasses a day. 2 months later, 10. Leanne worked every night. She touched the molten glass, and it became clearer, more uniform, bubble-free. The glass from Houghton was the best in the county, the best in the province, perhaps the best in the empire. Minso sold the first batch of glasses for 100 gold pieces, the second for 200, the third for 300. The price rose because demand rose. Everyone wanted clear glass. Aristocrats for show, merchants for prestige, apothecaries for their work. Money was pouring in. Ethan counted and made plans. But he remembered one promise. Late fall, a cold evening. Ethan sat alone in the workshop. In front of him stood a frame. Flat, wooden. Inside the frame was a sheet of glass. Thin, smooth. He'd spent 3 days on it, rolling out the molten glass on an iron table. Like dough. Over and over. The sheet turned out to be the size of 2 palms. Clear, transparent. On the back, Ethan applied a thin layer of tin and mercury. A recipe from a blog. A mirror. He turned it face up. He saw his reflection for the first time in this body. Young, thin, pale, dark hair, gray eyes. An unfamiliar face that had become almost familiar over the course of a year. He called out to Leanne. She flew over. She asked what had happened. He showed her the mirror. Leanne flew closer. She looked down. She saw it. She froze. A small figure in the mirror. Silver hair, pale skin, eyes the color of melting water, wings as thin as a dragonfly's. She was looking at herself. For the first time in her life. For 1,000 years, she hadn't known what she looked like. For 1,000 years, she had been nothing but a voice and hands to herself. Now she saw a face. Her own face. She settled onto the edge of the mirror. She raised her hand. Her reflection raised a hand. She touched her cheek. Her reflection touched her cheek. She turned away. Ethan could see she was crying, silver tears on silver cheeks. He didn't try to comfort her, he just sat beside her. He waited. A minute later, Leanne turned around. Her eyes were wet. But she wasn't crying anymore. She said she was beautiful. Quietly. Surprised. As if she didn't believe it. Ethan said, yes. She was beautiful. Leanne looked at him. Then back into the mirror. Then she took the mirror in both hands. Pressed it close to herself. She retreated to a corner of the workshop and sat there until morning, hugging her reflection. Ethan returned to the castle. He walked through the dark courtyard, a nail in his pocket. A year ago he had nothing. Now he has a mill, a saltworks, a blacksmith shop, a paper workshop, and a glass-blowing furnace. A road, a school, people who believe in him, or are starting to believe, and a fairy who saw her own face for the first time in her life. It was worth it. It was all worth it. The winter of the second year began differently, not like a wall, like a familiar enemy they'd been waiting for and had prepared for. Every house in Houghton had a Dutch oven. Firewood had been stockpiled since fall. The pantries were full. Flour, salt, turnips, peas, dried fish, salted pork. People weren't shivering by their hearths. Children weren't coughing. The elderly weren't freezing. Ethan stood on the castle porch, watching the first snowfall, and for the first time in a year, he didn't feel panic. Instead of panic, he felt something else. A heaviness. In his chest, in his shoulders, in his head. A year of non-stop work. Not a single day of rest. His body had grown stronger, but not quite enough. He was still thin, still weak by any peasant standards. His stomach ached from stress. His eyesight hadn't improved. Sora made him drink herbal teas and eat on a schedule. He would forget. She would remind him. Silently, she would set a cup down on the table in front of him and leave. He would drink. Because arguing with Sora was pointless. She never raised her voice. She just watched. That was enough. At the beginning of winter, what Ethan had been waiting for and fearing happened. Moldwyn struck. Not with swords, with papers. Baron Garrick Moldwyn arrived in person. For the first time. Ethan saw him from his study window. Fat. In an expensive fur coat. On a well-fed horse. An entourage of 20 horsemen. Anna had lined up a guard at the gate. 10 men. In new armor. With the latest model of crossbows. Bran had been forging them for 3 months. Lightweight. Accurate. With a drawstring. Moldwyn saw the guard and frowned. He had expected old men and a teenager with a rusty spear. Instead, he saw men in identical armor wielding identical weapons, standing at attention and looking at him without fear. Anna had done a splendid job. Moldwyn dismounted. He entered the castle. He saw the courtyard. Repaired. Clean. Glass in the windows. Real glass. Smoke rising steadily from the chimney. The roof was intact. His expression changed with every step. He had expected ruins. Instead, he saw a functioning castle. Ethan met him in the hall, the very same one that had been empty and cold a year ago. Now it contained a long table and chairs. On the table were glass tumblers. On the wall hung a map of the barony. In the corner was a bookshelf, a small library. 80 books. The ones found in the castle, plus the ones Ethan had bought from merchants whenever he could afford them. Moldwyn sat down. He placed a stack of parchments on the table. Receipts. 10 of them. All the debts he had bought up over the past year. The total amount was 8,000 gold pieces. With interest closer to 10. He said it was time to pay. His voice was heavy, slow. The voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. Ethan sat across from him. A nail in his pocket. Lean in his pocket. Both of his lifelines. He looked at the receipts. Then at Moldwyn. Then he said he'd pay. Moldwyn blinked. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected haggling, pleading, or anger. Ethan said he'd pay, but not with gold. With goods. At market price. Salt, paper, glass, iron. For a total of 10,000 gold pieces, to be delivered within 6 months. Moldwyn laughed. He said he didn't need nails from a pauper barony. He needed gold or land. Ethan nodded. He pulled a folder from under the table. A paper one. The first in the world. He placed it in front of Moldwyn. Inside were documents. A contract with the Con Trading House. Sales figures. Profits. The annual forecast. The Houghton Barony's balance sheet, prepared by Minso. Clean. Accurate. With seals. Moldwyn read, slowly. His expression changed. He wasn't a fool. Greedy. Cruel. But not a fool. He saw the numbers. He saw the growth. He saw that the barony, which a year ago was worth less than its debts, was now worth twice as much. And it continues to grow. Ethan said Moldwyn had 2 options. First, accept payment in goods and receive 10,000 worth of merchandise that could be resold at a markup. Second, demand the land and receive 3 villages without mills, without salt works, without workshops, and without people who know how to do any of that. Because the miller will leave, the blacksmith will leave, the papermaker will leave, the glassblower will leave. They'll follow Ethan, and Moldwyn will be left with empty houses and overgrown fields. Just like a year ago, Moldwyn was silent. Ethan waited. Moldwyn said he'd think about it. He stood up. He left. His entourage drove off. When the dust settled, Minso emerged from behind the door where she'd been listening to the entire conversation. She said it was a beautiful bluff. Ethan said he wasn't bluffing. Minso said he was bluffing, because if Moldwyn takes the land, the people won't leave. They have nowhere to go. Ethan said Moldwyn doesn't know that. Minso said Moldwyn will find out, sooner or later. Ethan said that by then, the bluff will have become the truth. Minso looked at him. Then she nodded. Moldvin returned a week later. He accepted payment in kind, with one condition. Full payment in 4 months instead of 6. Ethan agreed. It was tough, but doable. Production was running. Sales were coming in. Minso was squeezing the maximum out of every deal. 4 months. He'd manage. The following weeks were frantic. Everything was running at full throttle. The mill ground non-stop. The salt works operated around the clock. The paper workshop was churning out 100 sheets a day. The glass-blowing furnace burned continuously. Bran was forging from morning till night. People worked in 2 shifts. Ethan coordinated everything. He ran between the workshops. He checked things. He counted. He solved problems. One after another. A gear broke on the mill. A pipe burst in the salt works. A worker got burned in the glassworks. Sora treated him. Bran made repairs. Ethan rearranged the schedules on the fly. Emily kept the books with pinpoint accuracy. Minso sold goods with the ferocity of a tiger. Anna kept things in order and guarded the supply trains. Everyone did their part. Together they were a machine. Clumsy. Creaky. But it worked. By the end of the 2nd month of payments, Ethan collapsed. Again. Fever. Cough. Chest pain. Sora came. She examined him. She said that if he didn't stop working 18 hours a day, she'd tie him to the bed. Ethan said he had 4 months left. Sora said he had 1 life, and that 400 people depended on whether he was alive or not. If he died of exhaustion, everything would fall apart, because no one but him could see the whole picture. Ethan lay there staring at the ceiling. Australia. The spot was still there. Sora is right. He's irreplaceable, and that's the problem, the biggest one. If he gets hit by a wagon, or a knife, or an illness, everything will fall apart. He needs to delegate. Everyone needs to know not only their job, but also why it's necessary in the bigger picture. He started holding meetings. Every week. At the table in the hall. Bran, Emily, Minsu, Sora, Anna. He told them everything. Plans, numbers, problems, deadlines. He didn't give orders. He explained. He asked for opinions. He listened. The first meeting was awkward. Bran wasn't used to speaking in front of everyone. Emily blushed. Anna remained silent and watched. Sora drank tea. Minso spoke for all 3 of them. The 2nd meeting went better. The 3rd went even better. By the 4th, they were arguing with one another. Anna said they needed more guards because the supply wagons attracted bandits. Bran said they needed a 2nd blacksmith because 1 wasn't enough. Emily said they needed a 2nd granary because there was nowhere to store the grain. Minso said they needed to raise the price of glass because demand allowed it. Sora said they needed a bathhouse because people only bathed once a month, and that was the cause of half their illnesses. Ethan listened and took notes. Every single point. Every suggestion. Then he set priorities. Together with them. Not alone. For the first time, not alone. He lay in bed that evening and realized that this was exactly what he'd been missing. Not hands. Not money. Not time. People he could trust not only with the work, but also with the decisions. Leanne sat on a pillow and cracked a nut. She asked why he was smiling. Ethan said it was because, for the first time in a year, he felt that if he were gone tomorrow, the mill would keep turning. Leanne froze. She looked at him. Then she told him not to say things like that. Her voice wavered. Ethan realized he'd said too much. He apologized. Leanne turned away and remained silent until morning. He didn't press the issue. 1,000 years of loneliness can't be healed in a year. The shipment to Moldvin was completed by the end of the 4th month. The last wagon left on the final day of the deadline. 20 sacks of salt, 50 bundles of paper, 100 glass cups, 200 pounds of nails and staples. Minso counted every item. She checked them against the receipt. She affixed her seal. Moldwyn accepted them. He signed the discharge document. His face was stony. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to receiving goods instead of land. He wasn't used to seeing destitute barons who paid on time. He left in silence. Ethan stood at the gate and watched him go. A nail in his pocket. The weight in his chest was gone. Not all of it, but the part called Moldvin was gone. Anna stood beside him. She said Moldvin would return. Not with papers, with swords. Ethan said he knew. That's why she needed more people, and better weapons, and a plan to defend the castle. Anna nodded. She said she was already working on it. Ethan looked at her. He asked how long she'd been at it. Anna said from day one. She hadn't waited for orders. She'd seen the threat and had been preparing. Ethan said she was the best captain he could have imagined. Anna didn't reply, but her back straightened slightly. Spring of the second year, a year since the awakening, Houghton had changed beyond recognition. The road now ran from the castle through all 3 villages, 7 miles of rammed stone. The mill was running.
A second mill was under construction on a tributary of the quiet river, for paper. Water hammers would grind the pulp instead of people using pestles. Productivity would increase tenfold. The salt works operated steadily, 10 sacks a week in winter, 5 in summer. The blacksmith shop had expanded. Bran took on an apprentice, then a second. Then a blacksmith came from out of town, a young one of those who had fled from Moldwyn. Now there were 3 forges, 3 anvils. The glass-blowing workshop produced glasses and window panes. The windows in the castle were now transparent, real ones. Light poured in, and the walls that had seemed like prison walls a year ago now looked simply old, not scary. The school had grown, 20 children. Jack was the oldest student. He was already teaching the younger ones how to draw, on his own, without Ethan. Ethan wrote the school's first textbook. On paper, 20 pages, reading, arithmetic, basics of measurement. The first textbook in Houghton, perhaps the first in the barony, perhaps in the county. There were 3,000 gold pieces in the treasury after the payment to Moldvin. There was still a debt of 5,000 remaining on small promissory notes. Minsu restructured 3 of them. She contested 2. Payments on the remaining ones were made on time. The balance was positive every month. For the first time in Houghton's history, the population had grown. 400 had become 530. People were coming, in families, with children, with their tools. They'd heard that in Houghton they get paid. They're fed. They aren't beaten. They're given work. That was enough. People don't need a miracle. They need justice and bread. And Ethan gave them both. Anna recruited 20 guards. She trained them every day. Running, drill, crossbows, swords. The basics of tactics. She wasn't turning them into knights. She was turning them into a squad. One that follows orders. One that stands in formation. One that fires in volleys rather than haphazardly. 20 crossbowmen in formation are more dangerous than 80 swordsmen in a crowd. Ethan explained this to her. She understood immediately, because she knew it herself, because that was exactly why she had refused to burn the village. She knew that a disciplined unit was stronger than a brutal one. Bran forged the crossbows, new ones, with a trigger guard, with a guide rail, with a sighting bar. Leanne refined each one. The bowstring didn't snap. The mechanism didn't jam. The bolts flew true. 20 crossbows, 20 sets of armor. Lightweight, flexible, not knightly armor, infantry armor. Bran grumbled that making such armor wasn't a blacksmith's job. Ethan said that 20 identical breastplates was mass production, and that mass production was the future. Bran snorted. In mid-spring, what Ethan had foreseen happened. Moldwyn attacked. Not alone. Through others. A band of mercenaries. 80 men. Swords. Spears. Cavalry. They raided Little Houghton at night. Set the barn on fire. Ethan found out at dawn. A messenger ran up. A boy of about 12. Barefoot. Wearing only a shirt. His feet covered in blood from the road. Ethan listened, and his hands trembled. Not from fear. From rage. The granary full of grain. A month's work. A metric ton of flour. All burned. Anna was already setting up a guard. 20 men at the gates. In armor. With crossbows. Waiting for orders. Ethan said the mercenaries were still in the village. Anna said she knew. Her scout had reported it. The mercenaries were looting. Taking their time. They thought there was no enemy. Ethan went down to the castle's basement. In the basement was a room he'd set up a month ago. A table. A map. Figurines carved by Jack. Red and blue. A command post. He placed the red figurines at Little Houghton's position. 80. He placed the blue ones at the castle. 20. 4 to 1. In open combat, that's a death sentence.
But Ethan wasn't planning on open combat. He looked at the map. The road from Little Houghton to the castle passed through a narrow point, a bridge over a stream. Old, wooden, one horseman at a time. If the mercenaries headed for the castle, they'd cross the bridge. He turned to Anna, told her there was no need to go to them. We need to make them come to us. Anna looked at the map, at the bridge, then at Ethan. She nodded. The plan was simple. 10 guards on the bridge, behind a fortification of sandbags, with crossbows. 10 in ambush on the flank in the woods. The bridge is narrow. The cavalry won't be able to turn around. Crossbows have a range of 100 paces. The mercenaries with swords will have to cross the bridge under fire, one by one. Their number didn't matter.
The bridge could only accommodate one at a time.
Anna had positioned her men in 3 hours. Ethan sat in the basement. He moved the figurines around. He calculated distances. He calculated reload times. He calculated the angles of fire. 18 scenarios, a backup plan for every plan. Leanne sat on his shoulder and said nothing. She didn't understand war. She understood fear. Ethan could feel her trembling. He told her everything would be all right. She said he didn't know that. He said he did, because they had Anna. The mercenaries marched toward the bridge the next day, just as Ethan had calculated. After the raid, they moved toward the castle for the loot. 80 men, on horseback and on foot. They saw the bridge. They saw the fortification. They stopped. The leader, a burly man in chainmail, shouted for them to get lost. Anna stood behind the sacks. She replied that he could turn back or die right there. His choice. The leader laughed. He sent 10 men across the bridge. The first volley. 10 crossbow bolts, all at once, on command. 4 fell, 6 retreated. The second volley 20 seconds later. While they were reloading, 2 more fell. The rest ran back.
The leader stopped laughing.
He sent 20 more, on foot, with shields. The shields were made of wood. The crossbow bolts pierced right through the wood. Leanne had improved each bolt head. The steel was denser. The edges were sharper. A bolt would enter the shield and exit on the other side. 20 men reached the middle of the bridge. We lost 7. The rest fled. Then a flanking unit struck from the woods. 10 men, with crossbows, from behind. The mercenaries found themselves trapped between 2 groups of archers on the narrow bridge. Panic. A stampede. Horses neighed and threw their riders off. Ethan listened from the basement. Messengers ran back and forth reporting. He moved the pieces, giving orders, calmly, steadily, just like on a factory floor when a production line breaks down and you have to reroute the flow in 3 minutes. An hour later, it was all over. The mercenaries fled, leaving 23 bodies on and around the bridge. There were even more wounded. The Houtonians suffered no casualties. 2 were wounded, minor injuries. Sora treated them by evening. Anna came down to the basement, dirty, sweaty, with a scar that stood out against her pale face.
She placed a sword on the table,
A trophy. She said the bridge was holding. Ethan stood up, looked at her, said thank you. Anna said it was her job. Then she added quietly that his plan had worked. That 18 scenarios was madness, but madness that works. Ethan said it wasn't madness. It was logistics. Anna said that for the first time since they'd met, she understood him. Houghton had held out, 20 against 80. The news spread throughout the county within a week. A small, penniless baron with 20 guards had defeated Moldwyn's mercenaries, on the bridge, without suffering any losses, with crossbows that pierced shields. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. Houghton could no longer be touched with impunity. The Earl of Westmarch took notice and sent an invitation. Baron Houghton was invited to the, officially, with honors. Ethan held the invitation in his hands. Heavy parchment, a wax seal bearing the Westmarch coat of arms. Minso stood beside him. She said it was either a reward or a trap. More likely both. Ethan said he'd go. Minso said she would too. Anna said she certainly would. Leanne said she'd hide in his pocket. Ethan looked at them, at his team.
Then he said there was one thing to take care of before they left. He took out a piece of parchment, a new one, blank. He wrote 2 names on it, Ethan Houghton and Leanne of the Oak. Below the names was the text,
A contract for joint ownership of a glass-blowing workshop. Equal shares. Equal rights. 2 signatures. Leanne flew over. She read it. She reread it. She froze. She asked what it meant. Ethan said it meant the workshop belonged to both of them, that her name stood next to his, that she wasn't an assistant or a tool. She was a partner, a co-owner. Leanne stared at the parchment, at the 2 names. Then she turned away. Her shoulders trembled. Ethan didn't look. He already knew those silver tears. He gave her time. A minute later, Leanne returned. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was held high. She took the quill. The quill was bigger than she was. She wrapped both hands around it, and she signed. Crookedly, small, but legible. Leanne of the Oak. The first time a fairy had signed a human document, perhaps in all of history. Ethan rolled up the contract, put it in the chest, locked it. Tomorrow they're heading to Westmarch, to the Count.
To a world that doesn't yet know the rules have changed.
Westmarch greeted them with noise and stench. After the clean streets of Houghton, the city seemed like chaos. Mud on the streets, garbage spilling from windows, beggars by the walls. Ethan walked along, comparing. A year ago, Houghton had looked worse. Now, Houghton looked better. This spoke not to Houghton's greatness, but to how low the standard of living had fallen in the Velgard Empire. Anna walked on the right, her hand on the hilt. Her eyes were everywhere. Minsu walked on the left. Her back was straight. Her face was calm. Leanne was in her doublet pocket. Quiet. Count Westmarch's castle stood in the center of the city on a hill. Stone. Old. Massive. 10 times larger than Houghton Castle. Thick walls. Tall towers. At the gates, guards in elaborate armor bearing coats of arms. They were led through 3 courtyards, each larger than the last. In the last courtyard, a fountain. Made of stone. Not working. The pipe was clogged. Ethan looked at the fountain, and a diagram of the water-lifting mechanism automatically formed in his mind. A habit. Count Westmarch received them in the throne room. The hall was enormous.
The ceiling was lost in the darkness. Columns of gray stone. Tapestries on the walls. Old. Faded. Once beautiful. The Count sat in an armchair on a raised platform. A man of about 55. Lean. Wiry. Graying temples. Intelligent, cold eyes. Not a moldwin. Not a fat fool with money. A dangerous man. A young woman stood beside him. Tall. Blonde. Her posture was like a sword held upright. Catherine Westmarch. The Count's daughter. Ethan bowed. Not deeply, as an equal. A vassal's bow, but not a servile one. The Count was looking at him, and Ethan could feel himself being assessed. Every detail. His doublet. Simple but clean. His boots. Travel boots, but sturdy. His hands. Not the hands of an aristocrat. The hands of a man who works. The Count spoke. His voice was even. Soft. He said he'd heard about Baron Houghton. A lot. Steel, salt, paper, glass. The battle on the bridge. 20 against 80. Impressive. For a penniless boy from the western outskirts. Ethan listened. He smiled. Politely. Impenetrably. The Count said he had a question. Where from? Where did a boy with no mage, no army, no money, and no connections suddenly get the best steel in the county? And paper that can't be found anywhere on the continent? And glass that's clearer than the capitals?
Ethan replied. He said he worked, that he read, that he experimented, that he made mistakes and tried again. The Count said that was an answer for simpletons, and that he was no simpleton. Ethan said he didn't consider the Count a simpleton, and that the truth was simple. Knowledge, craft, labor. 3 things that require no magic or blood. The Count was silent. Catherine stood nearby, watching Ethan. He could feel her gaze, scrutinizing. Not hostile, curious. Dinner was a long affair. The Count spoke little. He listened a lot. Ethan spoke, cautiously, about the mill, about the salt works. Not everything, just part of it. Exactly enough for the Count to see the value and not perceive a threat. It was a dance. Every word weighed, every fact chosen carefully. Minsu sat beside him and provided figures when needed, precise, convincing. Anna sat silently and ate, but Ethan could see that she was memorizing the guards' positions, the exits, the windows. A habit. After dinner, the Count invited Ethan into his study, alone. Without Minsu, without Anna. Ethan went. Leanne tensed in his pocket.
The study was small, warm. The fireplace was burning. Maps on the walls. Lots of maps. The Count sat down. He offered wine. Ethan declined. His stomach. The Count nodded. Then he spoke differently, without pretense, without the grandeur of a throne room, man to man. He said that the Velgard Empire was dying. Mana is dwindling. The mages of the High Tower are growing weaker with each generation. The Kirin Khanate in the east is gaining strength. In 10 years, maybe 5, they'll march west. The Empire's army is a farce. Flashy armor and cowardly noble boys who've never held a sword heavier than a table knife. The county of Westmarch lies on the border. It will bear the brunt of the first blow, and it has no means to defend itself. Ethan listened. The Count was telling the truth. Ethan could see it in his eyes, in his voice, in the way his old fingers gripped the armrest of his chair. This man was afraid. Not for himself, for the lands, for the people, for his daughter. The Count said he needed Houghton. He needed steel. He needed crossbows. He needed paper for orders and maps. He needed glass for spyglasses. And he needed a man who knew how to turn dirt into gold. Ethan asked what the Count was offering in return.
The Count said 3 things. First, protection from the guild. Complete, official. Houghton trades freely throughout the entire county. Second, the title of Viscount. Houghton becomes a Viscounty, not a barony. Higher status, more rights, more land. Third, Catherine. Ethan was silent. Leanne froze in his pocket. The Count explained. Marriage. A political one. Catherine marries Ethan. Houghton becomes bound to Westmarch by blood. The Earl gains access to technology. Ethan receives the county's army for protection. Everyone wins. Ethan thought for 3 minutes. He remained silent. The Count waited. Then Ethan said he accepted the first and second points. He wanted to discuss the third, but not with the Count, with Catherine. The Count raised an eyebrow. He said that wasn't customary. Marriages are discussed by the father, not the bride. Ethan said that in Houghton, things were done differently. The Count looked at him for a long time. Then he smiled slightly. He said, "All right." In the morning, Ethan found Catherine in the castle library. It was enormous. Thousands of books. Dusty. Unread. Catherine was sitting by the window with a book. When he entered, she didn't look up. He sat down across from her, silently. He waited. She finished the page, closed the book, looked at him. Her eyes were gray, cold, like a winter sky. Ethan placed 2 sheets of paper in front of her. Houghton paper, white, blank. On the first was a contract, a marriage contract, standard, just as her father wanted. The wife obeys her husband. The husband's property, heirs through the male line. On the second was another contract, a partnership agreement, equal rights, joint property, with joint decisions. Catherine could own land, command people, sign documents in her own name, not as the Baron's wife, as Catherine Westmarch Houghton. He said the choice was hers, that he'd accept whichever one she chose, that if she didn't want either of them, he'd get up and leave and tell the Earl that it hadn't worked out. Catherine read the first contract for 10 seconds. She set it aside. She read the second one for 5 minutes, every line. Then she looked up. She asked who had written it. Ethan said he had, with Minz's help. Catherine asked if he was serious. Ethan said he couldn't be more serious. Catherine was silent. Then she asked if there was a library in Hawthorne. Ethan said there was. A small one, 80 books, but open to everyone. Catherine asked if she could borrow a book. Ethan said she could. Anyone. She didn't have to return it. Catherine looked at him. Something in her eyes changed. The winter sky turned into a spring sky. Not warm, but with a glimmer of hope. She took the second contract, folded it, put it in the book, said she'd think about it. Ethan nodded, stood up, walked toward the door. At the door, Catherine called out to him. She asked if she could come to Houghton, to take a look, before making a decision. Ethan said the doors were open, always. He stepped out. In the hallway, Leanne emerged from his pocket. Small, silver, her face unreadable. She asked if he liked this woman. Ethan said he didn't know her. Leanne asked why the contract then. Ethan said the contract wasn't about love. It was about justice. Leanne remained silent all the way to the guest quarters. That evening, Minso arrived with news. Moldwyn had been arrested. Count Westmarch had received evidence that the mercenaries were his.
An attack on the Count's vassal is an attack on the Count himself.
Moldwyn had been stripped of his title. His lands had been confiscated. Part of them had been transferred to Houghton. Ethan listened. Then he asked which part. Minso unfolded a map and pointed it out. 2 of Moldwyn's villages bordering Houghton's territory, with fields, a forest, and a river. A population of about 300 people. Ethan stared at the map. Houghton had just doubled in size. 5 villages instead of 3. 800 people instead of 530. And land. Lots of land. He sat down, looked out the window, at the city, at the lights, at the stars. A year and 4 months ago, he'd woken up in a dilapidated castle, deep in debt. Now he was a viscount with 5 villages and a contract with the most powerful man in the county. Leanne was sitting on the windowsill. She was looking at the same stars. He asked her what she was thinking about. She said she was thinking that 1,000 years ago, she'd come to help people and had been locked away. And now she was helping, and she wasn't being locked away. And that it was strange, and good, and scary.
Because the good things in her life always came to an end. Ethan said they wouldn't end. Leanne said he couldn't promise that. Ethan said he could, and he promised. Leanne looked at him. Then she turned away to look at the stars. But he noticed that she had moved a little closer to his hand on the windowsill. Catherine arrived a month later, alone, without an entourage, on a single horse, with a sword at her belt and a book in her saddlebag. Anna met her at the gate. The 2 female warriors looked at each other. Anna nodded. Catherine nodded. That was enough. Ethan led her through Houghton, not through the castle, but through the villages, the workshops, and along the road. Catherine walked in silence. She looked around, at the mill, at the water wheel turning smoothly and powerfully, at the blacksmith shop where 3 forges roared simultaneously, at the paper mill where water hammers pounded rhythmically, at the glass-blowing furnace where a master craftsman was blowing a glass, at the school where 20 children sat at their desks and wrote on paper, at the road, smooth, solid, at the houses with Dutch stoves, from whose chimneys a steady stream of smoke rose, at the people. Who greeted the Baron? They didn't bow to the ground. They greeted him as they would a person they respect, not fear.
She said nothing. 3 hours. Ethan didn't rush her. When they returned to the castle, Catherine asked to see the library. Ethan showed her. A small room on the first floor, 3 shelves, over 80 books, some in the common language, some in the imperial language, 2 in a language Ethan couldn't read. Catherine walked along the shelves. She ran her fingers along the spines. She pulled one out, opened it, read a page, closed it, pulled out another. Ethan stood by the door and waited. Catherine put the book back, turned to him, said that her father's library had 3,000 books, but the door was locked. Women are forbidden to enter. She read in secret, at night, when the guards fell asleep. There are 80 books here and the door is open. She prefers 80. Ethan said that in a year there would be 200. Catherine said she was signing the contract, the second one, the partnership agreement. Ethan nodded. Then he asked if she was sure. Catherine said she was sure, because she'd seen the mill, and the school, and people's faces,
And because he was the only man who'd offered her a choice.
instead of choosing for her. They signed the contract that very evening. Minsu witnessed it. Anna stood as a witness. Sora drank tea. Leanne hid behind the books on the shelf and watched. She didn't cry, but her eyes were wet. Ethan noticed. Later, at night, when everyone had gone their separate ways, he found Leanne on the castle roof, a tiny figure on the stone parapet, silver in the moonlight. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. He sat down beside her. He didn't speak. He waited. Leanne spoke first. She said she was afraid, that now that he had a wife, he would forget about her, that she would be alone again, that 1,000 years of loneliness had taught her one thing. Everyone leaves. Ethan listened. Then he said that the contract for the workshop was still in effect, that her name stood next to his, that nothing had changed, that Catherine was a partner and Leanne was a partner too, that there was enough room. Leanne said he didn't understand. Ethan said he did, that 1,000 years of is not something that can be cured with words, That he wouldn't promise her that everything would be wonderful.
He promised one thing,
That he would be there for her, every day. That he would consult with her on the blueprints. That he would invite her to meetings. That her opinion would carry just as much weight as Minsu's, or Anna's, or Catherine's. Because she isn't a battery. She's the architect of everything built in Hawthorne. Leanne was silent. Then she fluttered over to him. Small. Light. She perched on his shoulder. Pressed herself against his neck. Warm. Trembling. She sat there for a long time. Ethan didn't move. He waited. After 5 minutes, the trembling stopped. Leanne fell asleep, on his shoulder. For the first time in 1,000 years, she fell asleep not alone but next to someone. He sat on the roof, gazing at the stars, and didn't move because he was afraid of waking her. Catherine stayed in Houghton. The wedding was set for the fall. Until the wedding, she lived in the castle as a guest. But she wasn't a guest for even a single day. On the second morning, she went out into the courtyard in her training clothes and asked Anna to give her a wooden sword. Anna did. They sparred for an hour. Catherine was good. Fast. Technical. The fencing of an aristocrat. Beautiful.
effective one-on-one.
Anna was different. Rough. Heavy. Infantry style. Unattractive. Effective in formation. An hour later, both were covered in bruises. Both were smiling. In different ways. Anna's was wolf-like. Catherine's was reserved. But they were smiling. Ethan watched from the porch and realized these two would work well together. Catherine quickly found something to do. Anna trained the infantry. Father Cassian arrived at noon, alone, without guards, without an entourage, riding a skinny horse in a simple gray cassock without the insignia of the Inquisition. Only a silver medallion on his chest, an eye and a flame, the symbol of the interrogator. He was short, thin, about 50 years old. His face was angular. His eyes were dark and very observant. His hands were calm. His voice was quiet. He was the kind of person you don't notice in a crowd, and whom you can't forget afterward. Anna met him at the gate, her hand on the hilt. Cassian looked at her armor, at the crossbow on her back. He nodded slightly. He said he'd come to talk, not to fight. Anna said that conversations with the Inquisition often end in fire. Cassian said that wasn't always the case.
Ethan stepped out onto the porch.
He looked at the interrogator. The interrogator looked at him. The two men sized each other up. Ethan saw his hands. Calm. Unarmed. Clean nails. Long fingers. The fingers of a man who writes a lot. Not an executioner, a scribe. Or a scholar. He invited Cassian to dinner. Cassian accepted. Dinner was quiet. Two people sat at the table, Ethan and Cassian. Ethan had asked the others not to come. This was their conversation. Leanne was hidden in the room upstairs, far from the silver medallion. On the table was bread, white, made from Houghton flour, and glasses, glass, transparent, and paper, clean, water in a glass pitcher. Every object on the table was evidence, and every object could become a clue. Cassian ate in silence. Slowly. He tasted the bread, looked at the glass, touched the paper. Then he spoke. He said he had come from far away, from the capital, a 5-week journey, because rumors had reached the tower. About a baron from the western outskirts who makes steel better than the capitals, and paper found nowhere else, and glass clearer than any other, without magic, without mana veins. A commoner by birth, a boy. It's an anomaly.
Anomalies are his job.
Ethan listened. His heart beat steadily. He wouldn't allow himself to be afraid. Fear leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to the pyre. He asked what Cassian wanted to know. Cassian said he wanted to know the truth. Ethan asked what truth the Inquisition was seeking. Cassian paused. Then he said something strange. He said that the Inquisition was seeking one truth, but he, personally, was seeking another. That he had served the tower for 30 years. 30 years of burning books. 30 years of interrogating people who had tried to learn more than they were supposed to. And for 30 years, he had been asking himself one question. Is this right? Ethan looked at him and saw something he hadn't expected. Fatigue. Not physical. Moral. This man was tired of burning. tired of being the hand of a system that destroys knowledge, tired of hating himself for what he does. And he hadn't come here for Ethan's head. He'd come for an answer. Ethan poured him some water into a glass cup. Transparent. Clear. He set it in front of him. He said that this cup was made of sand. Ordinary sand from the riverbank. Melted. Molded. Purified. No magic. No forbidden knowledge.
Just heat and craftsmanship.
Cassian took the glass. He looked through it at the candle. The flame flickered behind the transparent wall. He set the glass down. Ethan continued. He said that paper is rags soaked in lye. Steel is coal and bellows. A mill is a wheel and water. Each of these things existed in the world before him. He simply put them together, in the right order, and showed people how to do the same. Cassian listened. Then he asked the question Ethan had been waiting for and dreading. He asked how he knew the order. Ethan paused. Then he told the truth. Part of it. He said that one night he was lying in bed in this castle and thought he was going to die. From hunger, from the cold, from debt. And that on that night, understanding came to him. Clear. Complete. As if someone had opened a door and shown him the way. He didn't know who. He didn't know why. But the path was clear. Step by step. What to do? How to do it. In what order? Cassian looked at him. For a long time. Then he asked if it was fairy magic. Ethan replied calmly. He said that fairies were fairy tales from the age of fairies. And he had a mill and a smithy. Cassian said that fairy tales sometimes turn out to be true. Ethan said that the truth sometimes turns out to be simpler than a fairy tale. They talked for 3 hours. Cassian asked questions. About how the mill worked. About the glass-making process. About paper. About the 3-field system. Ethan answered. In detail. Technically. Without holding anything back. He showed him blueprints. Explained the principles. Physics, mechanics, chemistry. In words Cassian could understand. Because Cassian was smart. Very smart. He asked the right questions. He saw the connections. He understood the logic. This was no executioner. This was a scientist who had been born at the wrong time and had become an inquisitor because there was no other path for an intelligent person in Velgard. By midnight, a stack of drawings lay on the table. Cassian looked at them. At the mill. At the Dutch oven. At the crossbow with a crank. At the diagram of the 3-field system. At the paper-making process. Then he looked up and said that all of this was forbidden knowledge, according to the tower's charter. Every drawing is a bonfire. Ethan nodded. Cassian said that over the past 30 years, he had seen a great deal of forbidden knowledge. Spells. Demonic runes. Fall of the 2nd year. Ethan and Catherine's wedding. A quiet one. At Houghton Castle. No pomp. No 100 guests. No golden carriages. Catherine herself wanted it that way. She said she'd seen enough lavish weddings at her father's court. Each one ended in an unhappy marriage. She wanted it to be different. They stood in the castle courtyard, the very same one where, a year and 7 months ago, there had been a pile of trash as tall as a man. Now the courtyard was clean, paved with stone, with lanterns on the posts and glass in the windows that caught the autumn sun. There were guests. Not many. Count Westmarch, the head of House Khan from Minso, Roland and Greg, Bran and his wife, Emily, Sora, Anna, 20 guards in full armor, children from the school, Jack in the front row, his face clean and wearing a new shirt, Grandma Maeve, who had walked all the way from the village on her own, leaning on a cane, 400 people from the villages standing outside the gates because not everyone could fit inside the courtyard. Leanne on Ethan's shoulder. In public for the first time, not hiding for the first time, little, silver, in a dress made of spider webs and moonlight that she'd made herself. People watched. They whispered. A fairy, a real one, alive, on the Baron's shoulder. Ethan knew that after this, the secret was over. The whole continent would find out. He'd made that decision that morning. He'd told Leanne that hiding was over, that she was a partner, not a secret, that her name was on the contract and belonged in the light of day. Leanne trembled, but she stepped out. And when 500 people saw her and fell silent, she straightened up, spread her wings, and became not a small, frightened fairy, but a being who had lived 1,000 years and endured betrayal and loneliness, and stood there because she had chosen to stand. Catherine saw Leanne and didn't flinch. She wasn't surprised. She knew. Ethan had told her a week before the wedding. Everything. About the ferry, about the contract, about how Leanne enhances materials. Catherine listened in silence. Then she asked one thing. Did he love her? Ethan said that Leanne was dear to him, as a partner, as a friend, as family. Catherine nodded. She said she understood.
That there was room for both.
The wedding was simple. Words, signatures. 2. On the partnership contract. Catherine Westmarch Houghton. Ethan Houghton. Minsu witnessed it. Anna stood behind them. Sora served tea instead of wine because Ethan can't have wine. Bran brought a gift. 2 rings. Made of Houghton steel. Thin, smooth, strong. Leanne touched them. They glowed for a second. Then the glow faded. The rings looked the same, but Ethan knew that now they would never rust. Ever. Count Westmarch watched it all with the expression of someone who doesn't fully understand what's happening, but senses that it's important. After the wedding came the feast. In the courtyard, tables on trestles. The food was simple but plentiful. Bread, meat, fish, porridge, pies. Beer that Ethan brewed using a recipe from his past life, with hops and the correct fermentation temperature. Leanne had improved the yeast. The beer turned out to be the best in the county. Anna drank 3 mugs and said she approved. In the middle of the feast, Ethan stood up. He took a nail out of his pocket. That very one, the first one, from Bran, 2 years ago. He placed it on the table. Then he took out a scroll.
He unrolled it. Emily handed it to him, clean, on Houghton paper, written in Ethan's hand, verified by Minso, approved by Catherine, agreed upon with Cassian in absentia via letter. The Houghton Charter of Free Craftsmanship, the full version, 30 articles. The essence is simple. Any person in the Viscountcy of Houghton who has mastered a craft and passed a master's examination is granted the right to sign, the right to a share in a workshop, the right to vote on the Council of Artisans, the right to teach others, regardless of bloodline, regardless of birth. Mastery is the right. Ethan read aloud. His voice trembled on the 3rd line, just as he'd planned. Because this was more than a document, it was an idea. Simple, dangerous, impossible by the standards of a world where bloodline decides everything. A person is worth as much as they can do, not as much as they have. He finished reading. He looked up. The people were silent. 500 people. Silence. Then Granny Maeve clapped, with her dry, old palms. Slowly. Then Bran, with his heavy blacksmith's hands. Then Emily. She was crying and clapping at the same time. Then everyone else. Anna stood behind Ethan, her hand on the hilt. Not because she was expecting an attack. Out of habit. Minsu was taking the minutes. Her pen raced across the paper. She was writing everything down. Every word. Every signature. For history. Sora sipped her tea and smiled. Quietly. Just like someone who has found their place. Catherine stood in the front row. She was holding a book. That very one. The first one she'd picked up at the Houghton Library. She was returning it. Her notes were in the margins. Ethan would read them later. Every comment. Every question. It was the beginning of another conversation. Leanne sat at Ethan's side. 2 years and 3 months after waking up. Spring of the 3rd year. Morning. 7 o'clock. Ethan stood in the hall of Houghton Castle in front of a table where 7 people were seated. Bran, Emily, Minso, Sora, Anna, Catherine, and Leanne, who was sitting on a stack of books to be at the same height as the others. A meeting about the water supply. Ethan unfolded the blueprint, a large one, on 4 sheets of Houghton paper glued together. A system of pipes from a mountain stream above the castle to a reservoir on the roof. From there, it would flow by gravity through pipes into the castle and down to the village. Clean water. No wells, no buckets, no mud. Sora said it would save more lives than anything else he'd ever built. Because half of all illnesses come from water. Ethan knew that. So the water system is next. Bran said he could forge the pipes. But they'd need a lot of them. A great many. He'd need a 4th forge. And a 5th blacksmith. Ethan said it would be done. Emily said they needed to recalculate the per capita water consumption. For 800 people. Because by summer there would be 900. Minso said the water system would cost 200 gold pieces for materials and 300 for labor. The treasury could handle it. But they needed to speed up the sale of glass, a new shipment of window glass for the county seat. Catherine said that scouts had reported movement along the county's eastern border. Kieran patrols.
Far away, but closer than a year ago. We need to think about defending not only Houghton but also the approaches. Anna said she needs 40 men instead of 20, and that it's time to build a second barracks.
Leanne said she can improve the clay pipes just as she improved the bricks. They won't crack in the cold.
Ethan listened. He took notes. He nodded. He asked questions. He got answers. He argued. He agreed. He changed the plan. He added to it. The meeting lasted an hour, then an hour and a half, then 2 hours. When they finished, everyone knew their task for the week, for the month, for the quarter. A system, one that works, one that's alive, one that doesn't depend on a single person. Because each of the 7 people at that table could handle their own part on their own, and they did. Ethan stepped out onto the porch. Morning, sun, spring air, warm, fresh. It smelled of earth and greenery. The castle courtyard, clean, paved. The window panes glisten. The roof is intact. The walls are sturdy. In the courtyard, a guard is sharpening his sword on a new whetstone. By the stables, Catherine is saddling a horse. At the gate, a wagon loaded with paper for Westmarch. Minsaw is checking the waybills. Jack's voice can be heard from the school. He's teaching a lesson. Alone. Without Ethan. 25 children. Steady smoke rises from the kitchen chimney. Martha is making breakfast. Martha, who 2 years ago was the only living soul in this castle. An old maid with red eyes and a patched apron. Now she has 2 assistants. And a new apron. And her eyes aren't red. Ethan went down into the courtyard. He set off down the road. That very same one. 7 miles of packed stone. Through Middle Houghton, through Little Houghton. Past the mill that was turning. Past a second mill that was still under construction. Past the salt works. Past the paper mill, from which the clatter of water hammers could be heard. Past the glass-blowing furnace, white heat streaming from its chimney. Past the new houses being built by settlers from the Moldovan villages. People on the road greeted one another. They bowed, not all the way to the ground, but nodded, as one does to another person. A man with a cart loaded with bricks. A woman with a basket of bread. Children running to school, barefoot but well-fed. An old man on a bench by his house, its wall warmed by a Dutch stove. He reached Brand's smithy, the old one, the first one, the one where it all began. Brand stood by the forge, gray-haired, upright, with one apprentice on his right and another on his left. 3 forges were roaring. 3 hammers were pounding. Brand saw Ethan and nodded, briefly, the way a man nods when he needs no words. Ethan nodded back. He touched the nail in his pocket. That very one, the first one. 2 years and 3 months. It was still there. Warm from his body, smooth, strong, not bent, not rusted, just like everything they had built. He walked on, toward the river, to the spot where the oak tree had stood. The oak was still standing, empty, with a crack in its bark, overgrown with moss. Ethan sat down on the same fallen tree he'd sat on 2 years ago when he heard the knock. He closed his eyes. Silence. Birds. The scent of pine needles. The river murmurs. The mill clatters. Somewhere far away, a child was laughing. Leanne crawled out of his pocket. She flew over to the oak. She touched the bark. An old tree. An old prison. She stood before it for a minute. Then she turned away. She flew over to Ethan. She perched on his knee. Tiny. Silver. With eyes that held not 1,000 years of loneliness, but something else. Something new. She said she remembered that day, when he opened the oak tree, when she saw the light for the first time in 1,000 years. She said that back then she asked him who he was, and he said, Ethan, Baron Houghton. She said he's bigger now. Not a baron, not a viscount, a man who builds. He just builds. For those around him. Ethan said he hadn't changed. He just used to build factories in Ohio, and now he builds mills in Houghton. There's no difference. Leanne said there was a difference. In Ohio, he built for money. Here, he builds for people. Ethan thought about it. Then he said she was right. Leanne said she was always right. She's 1,000 years old. He laughed. So did she. Quietly. Like the ringing of thin glass. They sat by the river. A man from another world and a fairy from another era. Around them lay Houghton. Small. Growing. Real. 5 villages. 900 people. A mill. A salt works. A blacksmith shop. A paper mill. A glass-blowing furnace, a school, a road, guards, a library, a charter. People who believe that tomorrow will be better than yesterday because, for 2 years, they have never been wrong in that belief. Far to the east, Kirin patrols were on the move. In the capital, the high tower was weakening. Mana was dwindling. The old world was cracking at the seams. Somewhere on the continent, those who had sealed Lian 1,000 years ago sensed that the seal had been broken. They would come. War would come. Change would come. Great. Inevitable. Terrifying. But that was later. Right now it's morning. Right now it's spring. Right now there's sunlight on the water, the clang of hammers from the smithy, and a child's laughter across the river. Ethan stood up. He brushed off his knees. He took a nail out of his pocket. He looked at it. Small. Thin. Straight. The first one. He put it back. Then he turned to Lian. She said it was time. They had a meeting at 7 in the morning about the water main. Lian said the meeting had already taken place. Ethan said that was the first one. The second one, based on the results of the field inspection. Lian groaned. She said he was impossible. Ethan said he knew. They walked back toward the castle. Along the road. Their road. Lian on his shoulder. The nail in his pocket. The sun at their backs. Houghton ahead. Work ahead. Ahead, people who needed clean water and sturdy walls and white bread and warm homes. Ahead lay a new era. One they had begun. Not with a sword. Not with magic. Not with blood. With a hammer and blueprints, and hands that aren't afraid of hard work. Ethan walked and smiled. That very same smile. Calm, steady. The smile of a man who sees the task at hand and knows he'll get it done. Not alone, together.